Every soldier dreams of coming home to their family's warm embrace. Daniel Mercer never imagined his homecoming would turn into his worst nightmare. Strange brown lumps appeared on his face within weeks of returning from deployment. The growths looked like nothing the doctors had ever seen before. When they burst open, green fluid poured out, leaving hollow cavities in his skin. Even experienced military doctors couldn't explain what was happening to him. Then someone found an old classified report from 1962. Soldiers had gone missing during a secret desert experiment. Their bodies were found with the exact same symptoms. Daniel started having memories of places he'd never been to. He saw visions of military facilities that supposedly never existed. What had the government done to these men decades ago? And why was it happening to Daniel now? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Mercer family's front porch, illuminating a collection of framed photographs that told the story of a life interrupted by duty. Daniel Mercer sat in his favorite rocking chair, the same one his grandfather had occupied for decades, watching his 8-year-old daughter Emma chase fireflies that lingered from the previous night. Her laughter echoed across their small yard in Pine Ridge, Montana, a sound that had sustained him through 18 months of deployment in Afghanistan. Sarah emerged from the kitchen, carrying 2 steaming cups of coffee, her auburn hair catching the early light. At 42, she carried herself with the quiet strength that military wives develop over years of holding families together during long separations. The lines around her green eyes spoke of nights spent worrying, of birthdays celebrated via video calls, of bedtime stories read over crackling phone connections. "You're up early again," she said, settling into the chair beside him. Her voice carried that gentle concern he'd grown accustomed to since his return 3 weeks ago. Daniel accepted the coffee gratefully, inhaling the rich aroma that reminded him of civilian life's simple pleasures, old habits. "Besides, I like watching her play." He gestured toward Emma, who had abandoned her firefly hunt in favor of examining something in the garden. "I miss so much of this." The weight of those lost months hung between them like morning fog. Daniel had deployed when Emma was barely 7, missing her first school play, her loose tooth ceremony, countless moments that photographs couldn't fully capture. Now, at 38, he felt the peculiar displacement that all returning soldiers know. The sensation of stepping back into a life that had continued without you, where conversations referenced events you hadn't witnessed and inside jokes had evolved in your absence. His discharge papers lay on the small table between their chairs. The official documents that marked his transition from Sergeant Daniel Mercer, United States Army, to simply Daniel Mercer, civilian. Honorable discharge. Commendation for service under fire. Purple Heart for wounds sustained during an IED explosion outside Kandahar. The papers represented everything he'd worked toward during his 8-year career. Yet looking at them now filled him with an unexpected melancholy. "The Hendersons want to have us over for dinner this weekend," Sarah said, breaking the comfortable silence. "They're eager to hear your stories." Daniel's jaw tightened slightly. Well-meaning neighbors and friends seemed to believe that war stories were entertainment, that his experiences could be packaged into neat anecdotes suitable for dinner party conversation. They didn't understand that most of what he'd seen and done belonged in a different world entirely, one that couldn't be translated into civilian terms without losing either its truth or its horror. "Maybe," he said, which they both knew meant. No. Emma ran toward them, her small face flushed with excitement. "Daddy, look what I found." She held up a smooth river stone, worn by time into an almost perfect oval. "It's like the one you sent me from that place with the funny name." "Afghanistan," Daniel said softly, remembering the similar stone he'd mailed home during his deployment. Emma had kept it on her nightstand, a tangible connection to her father's distant world. "That's beautiful, sweetheart." She climbed onto his lap, her small body warm against his chest. This was what he'd fought for, what had sustained him through the darkest moments, the promise of returning to this simple, profound love. Yet even now, holding his daughter close, part of his mind remained vigilant, scanning their peaceful surroundings for threats that didn't exist in Pine Ridge, Montana. The first sign that something was wrong had appeared 2 days after his homecoming. Daniel had been shaving when he noticed a small raised bump on his left cheek, just below his eye. It was roughly the size of a pencil eraser, brown in color and slightly warm to the touch. At first, he dismissed it as an ingrown hair or perhaps a reaction to the different climate. Afghanistan's dry air had given way to Montana's humid summer, and his skin was still adjusting. But the bump had grown larger, and within a week, 2 more had appeared along his jawline. They didn't hurt exactly, but they itched with a persistent intensity that kept him awake at night. When he scratched them, they felt oddly hollow, as if there were empty spaces beneath the skin. I made an appointment with Dr. Reeves, Sarah had said the previous morning, her voice carefully neutral. She'd been watching him probe the lumps with increasing frequency, seeing the way his mood had darkened as they multiplied. Dr. James Reeves had been the Mercer family physician for over 15 years, a soft-spoken man in his 60s who delivered Emma and treated everything from Daniel's childhood broken arm to Sarah's bout with pneumonia 3 winters ago. His small practice in downtown Pine Ridge served most of the surrounding farming community, and he prided himself on his ability to diagnose and treat the full spectrum of human ailments. The appointment had been scheduled for that afternoon. Daniel shifted Emma to his other knee, feeling the familiar weight of worry settling in his chest. The lumps had continued to spread, and now there were 7 of them scattered across the left side of his face and neck. They'd grown more pronounced, creating an asymmetrical appearance that made him avoid mirrors. Sarah hadn't said anything directly, but he'd caught her staring when she thought he wasn't looking, her expression a mixture of concern and something else. Fear, perhaps, or revulsion. "Will you read to me before you go to the doctor?" Emma asked, her voice muffled against his shirt. "Of course," Daniel replied, though the simple request triggered an unexpected flash of memory, not his own memory, but something else entirely. For a moment, he saw himself in a different place, a sterile white room with fluorescent lighting, reading to a child who wasn't Emma, a little girl with dark hair and sad eyes who called him by a name he didn't recognize. The vision lasted only seconds, but it left him shaken. He'd been experiencing these strange moments with increasing frequency since his return, brief glimpses of places he'd never been, conversations he'd never had, people he'd never met. The Army psychologist at his debriefing had mentioned that deployment-related stress could manifest in unexpected ways, but these felt different from typical PTSD symptoms. Sarah was watching him carefully. "You okay?" "Fine," he said automatically, the standard response he perfected over years of military service. Just tired. But he wasn't fine, and they both knew it. The lumps were only the most visible sign that something was fundamentally wrong. There were the memory flashes, the nightmares that felt more like someone else's experiences than his own, the growing sense of disconnection from the life he'd supposedly lived. Emma slipped down from his lap and ran back to her garden exploration, her attention already captured by something new. Daniel watched her go, struck by how easily children moved between moments, how naturally they inhabited the present without the weight of past experiences dragging behind them like chains. "She's grown so much," he said. Sarah nodded, her expression softening. "She missed you terribly. She used to sleep with that stone you sent, talk to it every night before bed. She'd tell it about her day, ask it to keep you safe." The image of his daughter confiding in a piece of rock brought tears to Daniel's eyes. He'd known intellectually that his absence affected his family, but hearing the specific details of how Emma had coped with his deployment made the sacrifice feel both more meaningful and more painful. They sat in comfortable silence, watching their daughter's innocent exploration of their small world. Pine Ridge spread out below them, a town of fewer than 3,000 people, nestled in a valley between rolling hills covered with pine and aspen. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business, where the high school football team's performance was front-page news, where the biggest excitement was usually the annual Harvest Festival. Daniel had grown up here, walked these same streets as a boy, graduated from Pine Ridge High School with a class of 47 students. He'd left for the Army at 19, driven by a combination of patriotic duty and small-town restlessness, promising Sarah he'd return a better man. Now, at 38, he wondered if he'd kept that promise or if the Army had changed him in ways that couldn't be reversed. The sound of a car engine interrupted his thoughts. A black sedan was making its way up their gravel driveway, moving slowly and deliberately. Daniel's body tensed automatically, his hand moving instinctively to where his sidearm would have been if he were still in uniform. The hypervigilance that had kept him alive in Afghanistan was slower to discharge than his military obligations. "Expecting someone?" he asked Sarah. She shook her head, studying the approaching vehicle with the same wariness that had infected Daniel. Military families developed an instinct for unexpected visitors, especially official-looking cars with government plates. The sedan stopped near their front porch, and a woman emerged from the driver's side. She was in her 50s, with graying brown hair pulled back in a professional bun and wire-rimmed glasses that gave her a scholarly appearance. She wore a white coat over dark slacks, clearly a medical professional of some kind. "Mr. and Mrs. Mercer?" she called out as she approached the porch. "I'm Dr. Margaret Hayes from the Veterans Medical Center in Billings. I was hoping I could speak with you about Sergeant Mercer's recent medical concerns." Daniel exchanged a glance with Sarah. Neither of them had contacted the VA medical system about his condition. Dr. Reeves hadn't had time to file any reports or make any referrals. "I haven't been to the VA," Daniel said carefully, his military training making him cautious about revealing information to unexpected visitors. Dr. Hayes climbed the porch steps, moving with the confident stride of someone accustomed to being welcomed into difficult conversations. "I understand that, Sergeant. I'm here because your case has come to our attention through other channels. May I sit down? What I need to discuss with you is quite serious." The morning's peaceful atmosphere evaporated like mist before the sun. Daniel felt Sarah's hand find his, her fingers cold despite the warm weather. Emma continued playing in the garden, oblivious to the tension that had suddenly descended on their small family. "Other channels?" Sarah asked, her voice tight with worry. Dr. Hayes settled into the chair that Emma had vacated, her expression grave but kind. "Mrs. Mercer, I need you to understand that what I'm about to tell you may be difficult to accept. Your husband's condition, the growths on his face and neck, they're not typical of any medical issue. In fact, they match a very specific set of symptoms that we've encountered before, though not recently." Daniel's hand moved unconsciously to touch the largest of the lumps, feeling its strange texture beneath his fingertips. What kind of symptoms? "The kind that appeared in a classified report from 1962, Dr. Hayes said quietly. 12 soldiers developed identical conditions during a military experiment in the Nevada desert. The project was classified at the highest levels, and most of the documentation was supposedly destroyed, but some records survived. The peaceful morning had transformed into something that felt like the opening scenes of a nightmare. Daniel stared at this stranger, who seemed to know more about his condition than he did, trying to process the implications of what she was saying. "What happened to those soldiers?" Sarah asked, though her tone suggested she already feared the answer. Dr. Hayes met her gaze directly, her expression compassionate but unflinching. "They died, Mrs. Mercer, all 12 of them, but not before their conditions progressed far beyond what your husband is currently experiencing." The words hung in the air like smoke from a distant fire, carrying the scent of approaching disaster. Daniel felt the world shift slightly, as if the foundation of his recently reclaimed life had developed hairline cracks that might, at any moment, split wide open. Emma's laughter drifted up from the garden, a sound that now seemed to come from a different world entirely, one where fathers came home from war and lived quietly ever after, where strange lumps were nothing more than minor medical inconveniences, where classified military experiments belonged safely in the past. Dr. Hayes reached into her coat and withdrew a manila folder, its edges worn with age and handling. "I think you need to see what we're dealing with, Sergeant. And then we need to discuss what we're going to do about it." Dr. Hayes opened the manila folder with the careful reverence of someone handling evidence from a crime scene. The documents inside were yellowed with age, their edges brittle and corners dog-eared from decades of storage. Daniel could make out official letterheads, medical charts, and what appeared to be photographs, though from his angle he couldn't discern their contents. "Operation Desert Mirage," Dr. Hayes said, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Conducted between March and September 1962 at a facility that officially never existed, approximately 200 miles northwest of Las Vegas. The project was classified under the highest security clearances, buried so deep that even most military historians have never heard of it." Sarah leaned forward in her chair, her coffee growing cold in her hands. "What kind of operation?" "Psychological warfare research," Dr. Hayes replied, selecting a document from the folder. The Cold War was at its peak, and both sides were exploring unconventional methods of gaining strategic advantages. The American military was particularly interested in the possibility of implanting false memories or manipulating existing ones, creating perfect sleeper agents, or extracting information without traditional interrogation methods. Daniel felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. The memory flashes he'd been experiencing suddenly took on a more sinister quality. "You're talking about mind control." "In the crudest terms, yes." Dr. Hayes selected a photograph from the folder and held it up. It showed a young soldier, perhaps 22 years old, with short-cropped brown hair and earnest eyes. Most disturbing were the brown lumps scattered across the left side of his face, identical in size and placement to Daniel's current condition. "This is Private Tommy Morrison, age 21, from Tulsa, Oklahoma. He volunteered for what he was told would be a routine medical study. $50 for a week of tests and observations." Sarah gasped audibly, her hand flying to her mouth. The resemblance between the photograph and Daniel's current appearance was undeniable. "That's exactly what my husband looks like now," Sarah finished, her voice barely steady. Dr. Hayes nodded grimly. Private Morrison was one of 12 soldiers who participated in the initial phase of Desert Mirage. The researchers were testing an experimental drug combination designed to make subjects more susceptible to memory manipulation. The brown lumps were an unexpected side effect that developed in all 12 subjects within the first week. She pulled out another photograph, and Daniel felt his stomach clench. This one showed the same soldier, but the lumps had progressed dramatically. They covered not just his face, but his neck and what was visible of his chest. Some had grown to the size of golf balls, creating grotesque distortions in his features. But most disturbing of all, several of the lumps appeared to have ruptured, leaving dark cavities in the man's flesh. The progression was consistent across all subjects, Dr. Hayes continued, her clinical tone unable to mask the horror of what she was describing. First, the lumps appeared, typically starting on the left side of the face. Then they began to multiply and grow larger. By the second week, they started rupturing, releasing a green fluid that our analysis suggests contained cerebrospinal fluid, mixed with foreign proteins. Daniel's hand moved involuntarily to his own lumps, feeling their warm, slightly pulsing texture. Foreign proteins? The research team believed they were byproducts of the brain's attempt to reject artificial memories. Think of it as an immune response, but instead of fighting off a virus or bacteria, the subjects' minds were trying to purge implanted experiences that didn't belong to them. The implications hit Daniel like a physical blow. Are you saying that? These soldiers had false memories implanted in their minds. Dr. Hayes carefully returned the photographs to the folder. The documentation is incomplete, but yes. The researchers were attempting to overlay existing personalities with constructed identities. The subjects would retain their original memories, but also gain detailed recollections of experiences they'd never actually had. In essence, they were trying to create soldiers who could infiltrate enemy organizations with completely believable false backgrounds. Sarah stood abruptly, pacing to the edge of the porch. This is insane. You're talking about something out of a science fiction movie, not real military operations. I understand how it sounds, Mrs. Mercer, but the 1960s were a different time. Both the American and Soviet militaries were exploring technologies that seem impossible, now remote viewing, psychic warfare, memory manipulation. Most of these programs were shut down when they proved unsuccessful or too dangerous, but some continued in secret. Daniel studied Dr. Hayes carefully, trying to read her motivations. Why are you telling us this? And how did you even know about my condition? Because 12 hours ago, I received a call from your family physician, Dr. Reeves. He'd photographed your symptoms for a consultation with a dermatology specialist in Billings. And those photographs ended up on the desk of a colleague who recognized the pattern. There are very few people left who remember Desert Mirage, but those of us who do have been watching for any recurrence of these specific symptoms. She pulled out a thick report bound with faded red tape. This is the only surviving comprehensive documentation of the experiment. Most of the files were destroyed in 1967, but a few copies were hidden by researchers who believed the work should be preserved as a warning. A warning about what? Sarah demanded, returning to her chair. About what happens when you try to force foreign memories into a human mind. The brain isn't designed to hold multiple complete sets of experiences. The 12 subjects in Desert Mirage didn't just develop physical symptoms. They began experiencing severe psychological fragmentation. They would switch between personalities, sometimes believing they were entirely different people. Private Morrison, for instance, began claiming he was a Confederate soldier from the Civil War, complete with detailed memories of battles he'd never fought. Daniel felt a cold recognition settle in his chest. The strange memory flashes, the moments of feeling disconnected from his own life, the sense that some of his experiences belonged to someone else. It all aligned with what Dr. Hayes was describing. The green fluid you mentioned, he said slowly. What exactly is it? Based on the 1962 analysis, it appears to be the brain's attempt to physically expel the foreign memory engrams. The lumps form around clusters of artificial neural pathways, essentially quarantining them. When the quarantine fails, the lumps rupture and release the contaminated tissue. As if summoned by their conversation, Daniel felt a familiar warmth spreading across his cheek. He touched the largest lump, and his fingers came away sticky with a substance he'd never seen before, a thick, greenish fluid that seemed to glow slightly in the morning light. "Oh, God," Sarah whispered, staring at his fingertips. "It's starting." Dr. Hayes leaned forward urgently. "How long have you been experiencing memory anomalies, Sergeant? Recollections of places you've never been, people you've never met, experiences that don't fit with your known personal history?" Daniel wiped the green fluid on his jeans, his mind racing through the past 3 weeks. "Since I got home, maybe before, I thought it was just deployment stress. Can you describe them? Flashes, mostly. A sterile room with fluorescent lights. A little girl with dark hair who wasn't my daughter. Someone calling me by a different name. He paused, accessing memories that felt simultaneously familiar and foreign. Knowledge of military procedures I was never trained in. Combat techniques that aren't part of standard Army doctrine. Dr. Hayes made notes on a pad she produced from her coat pocket. The foreign memories are becoming more accessible. That's consistent with the progression documented in 1962. As the physical symptoms advance, the implanted experiences begin to surface more frequently. Emma's voice called out from the garden, breaking the intense focus of their conversation. "Daddy, come see what I found." All three adults turned to look at the 8-year-old, who was waving excitedly from beside Sarah's tomato plants. In that moment, Daniel was struck by the terrible fragility of the life they'd built, his daughter's innocence, his wife's trust, the simple domesticity they'd fought so hard to achieve. All of it threatened by something that had happened before. Emma was even born, a military experiment that had supposedly ended 6 decades ago. "In a minute, sweetheart," he called back, then turned to Dr. Hayes. "What happened to Private Morrison? How did his story end?" Dr. Hayes consulted her folder, again pulling out what appeared to be a death certificate. He died on September 23, 1962. Massive cerebral hemorrhaging caused by the rupture of multiple cranial lumps. The green fluid had apparently become toxic at high concentrations, poisoning his brain tissue. His last coherent words, according to the medical log, were him asking to speak to his wife, Mary. The problem was, Tommy Morrison was never married. Mary was apparently a detail from one of his implanted identities. The weight of this revelation settled over the porch like a physical presence. Daniel stared at his hands, watching small droplets of green fluid seep from underneath his fingernails. How much of his own life was real? His marriage to Sarah, his memories of Emma's birth, his military service. How could he be certain that any of it belonged to him? "There's something else," Dr. Hayes said, her voice becoming even more serious. "The reason I drove out here, instead of simply calling or arranging an appointment at the medical center. Yesterday, my office received a visit from a Colonel James Bradford. He claimed to be conducting a routine follow-up on veteran medical concerns, but his questions were very specifically about any soldiers presenting with unusual dermatological symptoms." Sarah gripped the arms of her chair. "Government cover-up?" "It's possible." Colonel Bradford was very interested in whether we'd encountered any cases resembling historical medical anomalies. He left his card and requested immediate notification if any such cases came to our attention. Dr. Hayes reached into her coat and produced a business card with official military letterhead. "The interesting thing is, when I called the number on his card to report your husband's condition, the line was disconnected." Daniel felt the old military paranoia stirring in his chest, the hypervigilance that had kept him alive during combat. Deployments, fake identity, or worse, real identity, with orders to suppress any information about Desert Mirage survivors. Dr. Hayes closed her folder and met Daniel's eyes directly. "Sergeant Mercer, I believe you may be in significant danger, not just from the medical condition, but from people who want to ensure that Operation Desert Mirage remains classified." As if to emphasize her point, another lump on Daniel's neck began to weep the strange green fluid, creating a warm, sticky trail down toward his collar. The physical progression was accelerating, just as it had with Private Morrison and his 11 companions 60 years ago. "What do you recommend?" Sarah asked, though her tone suggested she already feared the answer. "We need to get Sergeant Mercer to a secure medical facility where we can monitor his condition and hopefully find a way to reverse the process. But more importantly, we need to do it without alerting whoever sent Colonel Bradford to investigate." Daniel stood slowly, feeling the weight of decision settling on his shoulders. Emma was still playing in the garden, blissfully unaware that their peaceful morning had just become the opening chapter of something much darker. The choice before him was simple in its complexity. Trust this stranger who claimed to want to help, or wait for his condition to progress until he ended up like Private Tommy Morrison, dying in confusion while calling for people who may have never existed. How much time do I have? He asked. Dr. Hayes gathered her papers, preparing to leave. Based on the 1962 progression charts, Private Morrison lived for approximately 6 weeks after his first symptoms appeared. You've been experiencing symptoms for 3 weeks. She met his eyes gravely. Sergeant, if we're going to save your life and get to the bottom of what's happening to you, we need to move quickly. And we need to assume that we're not the only ones interested in your condition. The morning that had begun with coffee and fireflies had transformed into something resembling the opening of a military operation, except this time, Daniel wasn't sure who the enemy was, what they wanted, or whether the memories he was using to make tactical decisions were even his own. 3 days after Dr. Hayes' visit, Daniel stood in front of the bathroom mirror, counting the lumps that now covered the left side of his face and neck. What had started as 7 discrete growths had multiplied to 14, and 2 new ones had appeared on his upper chest during the night. Each was roughly the size of a marble, warm to the touch, and occasionally leaked the strange green fluid that had begun to stain his pillowcases. Sarah appeared in the doorway behind him, her face drawn with exhaustion. She'd barely slept since learning about Operation Desert Mirage, spending her nights researching Cold War medical experiments on her laptop while Daniel paced the house, driven by a restless energy that felt foreign to his own personality. "Any more overnight?" she asked, though she could clearly see the answer in the mirror's reflection. "2," Daniel replied, touching the newest growths near his collarbone. "They're spreading faster." The progression matched what Dr. Hayes had shown them in the 1962 medical reports. Private Morrison's condition had accelerated in the 3rd week, with new lumps appearing every 12 to 18 hours. The green fluid had increased proportionally, and the original photograph showed Morrison's left eye beginning to swell closed as the growth compressed his facial features. Daniel's left eye wasn't swollen yet, but he could feel the pressure building as the lumps grew larger. More disturbing were the memory episodes that seemed to correlate with each new growth. Yesterday, he'd experienced a vivid recollection of operating complex military equipment. He'd never been trained to use some kind of communications array, with frequencies and protocols that weren't part of standard Army doctrine. "I've been thinking about what Dr. Hayes said," Sarah said, moving to stand beside him at the mirror. "About Colonel Bradford using a fake phone number. I tried calling the number myself yesterday." Daniel turned to face her. "And?" "The recording says the number is no longer in service, but before it disconnects, there's a brief burst of static. I recorded it on my phone and played it back several times. It sounds like Morse code." This revelation hit Daniel with unexpected familiarity. Without conscious thought, he found himself translating the rhythm Sarah described. Dash 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 dash. X7 in Morse code. Sarah stared at him. "How do you know Morse code?" "You never learned that in the Army." The realization struck them both simultaneously. Daniel's military training had never included communications protocols beyond basic radio procedure. Yet he translated the Morse sequence automatically, as if the knowledge had always been part of his skill set. "It's happening more frequently," he admitted. "Yesterday, I found myself sketching building layouts, detailed architectural drawings of some kind of underground facility. I don't remember making the sketches, but they were in my handwriting." He led Sarah to his desk, where several sheets of paper were covered with precise technical drawings. The sketches showed a complex subterranean structure with multiple levels, ventilation systems, and what appeared to be specialized laboratory spaces. At the bottom of the main diagram, written in Daniel's careful script, were the words Facility X7, Level 3, Memory Processing Center. "These aren't random doodles," Sarah observed, studying the drawings with growing alarm. "These look like military engineering schematics." Daniel nodded grimly. The level of detail in the sketches suggested intimate familiarity with the facilities, layout knowledge that could only come from someone who had spent significant time inside the structure. But Daniel had never been to Nevada, had never seen underground military installations beyond what was shown in movies. The sound of a car engine in their driveway interrupted their analysis. Daniel moved to the bedroom window and peered through. The blinds, his paranoia heightened by Dr. Hayes' warnings about Colonel Bradford. A white sedan had pulled up behind Sarah's car, and a man in military uniform was climbing out of the driver's seat. "We have a visitor," Daniel said, his voice tight with tension. Sarah joined him at the window. The man approaching their front door was tall and lean, with graying hair and the rigid posture that marked career military officers. His uniform bore the eagle insignia of a full colonel, and his stride conveyed the authority of someone accustomed to having his orders followed without question. "Colonel Bradford?" Sarah whispered. "Has to be." Daniel was already moving, grabbing a shirt from their dresser and pulling it on to cover the lumps on his chest. "Let me handle this." The doorbell rang as they made their way downstairs. Emma was in the living room, watching cartoons on television with the innocent absorption that only children could achieve. Daniel paused to kiss the top of her head, struck by how normal this moment felt despite the surreal circumstances surrounding them. "Stay inside and keep an eye on Emma," he told Sarah, then opened the front door. Colonel James Bradford was exactly as Daniel had imagined, a man in his late 50s, with steel-gray eyes and a face that revealed nothing of his thoughts or intentions. His uniform was pristine, his bearing suggesting decades of command experience. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being taken seriously. "Sergeant Mercer, I'm Colonel James Bradford from the Army Medical Research Command. I'd like to speak with you about your recent medical concerns." Daniel remained in the doorway, not inviting the colonel inside. His military training told him to show proper respect to a superior officer, but his instincts warned him that this man represented a threat to his family's safety. "What medical concerns would those be, sir?" Bradford's eyes moved briefly to Daniel's face, taking in the visible lumps with an expression that suggested he'd been expecting exactly what he saw. "Sergeant, I think we both know why I'm here. May I come in?" "I'd prefer we talk out here." Bradford nodded as if he'd expected this response. "Very well. Sergeant Mercer, you've recently been in contact with Dr. Margaret Hayes from the Billings via Medical Center. She shared certain information with you regarding historical military medical research. I'm here to clarify some misconceptions and ensure you receive proper care." The colonel's tone was reasonable, almost fatherly, but Daniel detected an underlying steel that suggested this was not a request. "What kind of misconceptions?" "Dr. Hayes has shown you documents relating to something called Operation Desert Mirage. While these documents are authentic, her interpretation of their significance is flawed. The research conducted in 1962 was limited in scope and completely unrelated to your current condition." Daniel felt anger rising in his chest, not his own anger. He realized with growing alarm, but someone else's fury at being lied to and manipulated. The emotion felt foreign yet familiar, as if it belonged to a part of his personality that had been dormant until now. "Then how do you explain the identical symptoms?" Daniel asked, his voice harder than he'd intended. Bradford stepped closer, his expression becoming more serious. "Sergeant, you served in Afghanistan. You were exposed to numerous environmental hazards, depleted uranium, chemical agents, exotic pathogens. What you're experiencing is likely a delayed reaction to something you encountered during deployment. The resemblance to the 1962 cases is purely coincidental. Coincidental. Daniel repeated the word with obvious skepticism. And the Morse code message on your business card's phone number? The X7 designation? That's coincidental too. For the first time, Bradford's composed facade cracked slightly. His eyes narrowed, and Daniel caught a glimpse of the calculation happening behind them. I'm not sure what you're referring to, Sergeant. I think you are. Daniel felt that foreign anger growing stronger, along with tactical knowledge that definitely wasn't part of his original training. Without conscious thought, he was assessing Bradford's posture, looking for signs of concealed weapons, calculating angles of attack and escape routes. The question is, what are you going to do about it? Bradford reached into his coat pocket, a movement that triggered every alarm in Daniel's combat-trained nervous system. But instead of a weapon, the colonel produced a thick manila envelope. Sergeant Mercer, inside this envelope are orders transferring you to Walter Reed Medical Center for comprehensive evaluation and treatment. The orders are effective immediately, and transportation will be provided. You'll receive the best possible care, and your family will be looked after during your treatment. Daniel made no move to accept the envelope. And if I refuse, then you'll continue to deteriorate until you end up like Private Morrison and his 11 companions, dead within the next 3 weeks after experiencing complete psychological breakdown and physical disintegration. Bradford's voice remained calm, but his words carried unmistakable menace. Is that really what you want for your family, Sergeant? The standoff stretched between them. Two military men sizing each other up with the instinctive wariness of potential combatants. Daniel was aware of Sarah watching from the living room window, of Emma's laughter drifting from inside the house, of the peaceful Montana morning that surrounded their small domestic crisis. But he was also aware of something else, knowledge that wasn't his own, tactical awareness that belonged to someone with different training and different experiences. Somewhere in the back of his mind, a voice that wasn't quite his own was whispering that Colonel Bradford was lying, that Walter Reed meant disappearance rather than treatment, that the orders in the envelope were not meant to save Daniel's life, but to ensure his silence. I need to discuss this with my wife, Daniel said finally. Bradford checked his watch with the practiced gesture of a man operating on a strict timeline. You have 1 hour, Sergeant. Transportation will arrive at 1400 hours whether you've made your decision or not. He turned and walked back to his sedan, leaving the envelope on the porch railing. As he drove away, Daniel noticed that the car's license plate was government-issued, but bore no identifying numbers or letters, just a string of characters that looked more like a code than a registration. Sarah appeared at his side as soon as Bradford's car disappeared around the bend in their rural road. We're not going with him, she said firmly, her voice carrying the determined tone that Daniel had learned to respect during their 12 years of marriage. The alternative might be watching me die like Tommy Morrison, or it might be walking into whatever killed Tommy Morrison in the first place. Sarah picked up the envelope Bradford had left behind, weighing it in her hands as if it contained something dangerous. Think about it, Daniel. If this really is just a medical condition caused by deployment exposure, why would they send a colonel to your front door? Why the secrecy and the fake phone numbers? Daniel touched one of the lumps on his neck, feeling the warm fluid moving beneath the surface. The rational part of his mind agreed with Sarah's logic, but another part, the part that seemed to contain knowledge he'd never acquired, was screaming warnings about the consequences of defying military authority. Dr. Hayes left her real contact information, Sarah continued. She said we could call her anytime, day or night. Maybe we should hear what she has to say before we make any decisions about Walter Reed. As they stood on their front porch, Daniel experienced another memory flash, this one more vivid and detailed than any previous episode. He saw himself in a medical examination room, but not the sterile, modern facility he'd imagined. This was older, with vintage equipment and personnel, wearing military uniforms from a different era. A doctor with thick glasses was explaining something about memory overlay procedures, while technicians prepared syringes filled with an iridescent blue liquid. The vision was so clear that Daniel could smell the antiseptic, feel the cold metal of the examination table against his back, hear the hum of electrical equipment that belonged to a time before modern medical technology. But most disturbing of all, the face he saw reflected in the doctor's glasses wasn't his own. It was younger, with different features and darker hair. "Daniel?" Sarah's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Daniel, you're bleeding." He looked down to see green fluid dripping steadily from 3 of the lumps on his face. The substance was thicker now, more viscous, and it carried a metallic smell that reminded him of blood, but wasn't quite the same. His shirt was beginning to stain where the fluid had soaked through. "We need to call Dr. Hayes," Sarah said urgently. "This is getting worse faster than she predicted." But before Daniel could respond, he heard the sound of another vehicle approaching their house. This time, it was a black SUV with tinted windows, moving much faster than Colonel Bradford's sedan had. As it pulled into their driveway, Daniel caught a glimpse of additional vehicles following behind, at least 2 more SUVs forming what looked suspiciously like a convoy. "Get Emma," Daniel said, his voice suddenly commanding in a way that Sarah had never heard before. "Pack a bag with essentials. We have maybe 5 minutes before they reach the house." "Daniel, what are you?" "Sarah, listen to me." He gripped her shoulders, looking directly into her eyes. "Whatever's happening to me, whoever these people are, they're not here to help. Every instinct I have is telling me that if we go with them, we won't be coming back." Sarah stared at him for a moment, seeing something in his expression that she'd never witnessed before, a cold, tactical awareness that belonged to someone with extensive combat experience. But Daniel's military service had been primarily administrative and logistics. He'd never been trained for special operations or high-level tactical planning. "Whose instincts are those?" she asked quietly. The question hit Daniel with the force of a physical blow. He honestly didn't know whether the urgent tactical awareness flooding his mind belonged to his own experience or to memories that had been implanted from someone else's life. But at that moment, with armed government vehicles approaching their home and his condition deteriorating rapidly, the source of the knowledge mattered less than its accuracy. "Pack the bag," he repeated. "We're leaving through the back, across the creek, toward the Henderson farm. They won't expect us to move." "On foot." Sarah nodded and ran inside, her trust in her husband overriding her confusion about his sudden transformation. Daniel could hear her urgent whispers as she explained to Emma that they needed to leave immediately, that it was like a game, but she had to be very quiet and very brave. While Sarah packed, Daniel moved to his desk and gathered the sketches he'd made of Facility X7. Looking at them now with clearer eyes, he realized the drawings contained details that no casual observer could have known: security camera placement, ventilation shaft dimensions, even what appeared to be guard rotation schedules, written in small notations along the margins. The sound of car doors slamming reached him from the front yard. Through the window, he could see at least 6 men in dark suits moving toward the house with the coordinated precision of a well-trained team. They weren't walking like government bureaucrats or medical personnel. They were advancing like soldiers, preparing to secure a hostile position. Daniel felt another wave of foreign knowledge flood his consciousness. He knew with certainty that frightened him that the men outside were armed and operating under orders to take him into custody by any means necessary. He could visualize their likely tactical approach, predict their entry points, even estimate their equipment loadout based on the way they moved and positioned themselves. But this knowledge came with a disturbing realization: it belonged to Someone with extensive experience in exactly these kinds of operations. Someone who had conducted raids, planned tactical entries, and knew intimately how government extraction teams operated. Someone who definitely wasn't Sergeant Daniel Mercer, logistics coordinator for the 82nd Airborne Division. "Ready," Sarah whispered, appearing at his side with a backpack and Emma's hand firmly in hers. Their daughter was wide-eyed but silent, having inherited her mother's ability to sense when situations required immediate compliance. Daniel led them through the kitchen toward the back door, moving with a stealth that felt both natural and completely foreign. As they reached the mudroom, the front door exploded inward with the sharp crack of a breaching charge. Shouts filled the house professional, clipped orders that confirmed Daniel's assessment of their visitor's true nature. "Go," he whispered to Sarah, opening the back door and checking the yard for additional operatives. The way was clear, but his tactical awareness told him they had perhaps 90 seconds before the house was fully secured and the perimeter expanded. They moved across their backyard in a crouched run, staying low and using the garden shed for concealment. Emma whimpered once when her foot caught on an exposed tree root, but Sarah quickly soothed her with gentle shushes. Behind them, Daniel could hear the sounds of their home being systematically searched, furniture being moved, closets opened, his desk drawers being pulled out and emptied. The creek that bordered their property was swollen with recent rain, running fast and cold over the smooth stones that Emma loved to collect during their weekend walks. Under normal circumstances, crossing would have required careful navigation to avoid slipping on the wet rocks. But Daniel found himself evaluating the water flow with the expertise of someone trained in tactical river crossings, automatically selecting the optimal path for a family group with a child. "This way," he said, leading them to a series of larger stones that would provide stable footing. "Sarah, you go first, then help Emma across. I'll bring up the rear." As they crossed the creek, Daniel caught sight of movement in their backyard. Two men in dark clothing were examining the ground near their back door, following the obvious trail they'd left in their hasty escape. One was speaking into a radio, coordinating with the search team inside the house. "They've found our trail," Daniel said once they'd reached the opposite bank. "We need to move faster." The Henderson farm lay across 2 fields of recently harvested wheat, offering minimal cover but representing their best chance of reaching help before the search teams expanded their perimeter. Daniel's tactical knowledge suggested they had perhaps 10 minutes before helicopters would be called in to provide aerial surveillance of the area. As they made their way across the first field, Daniel experienced another intense memory episode. This time, he saw himself, or someone who looked like him, in what appeared to be a briefing room, filled with men in 1960s military uniforms. A general was explaining something about memory overlays and personality integration, while slides showed brain scans and psychological profiles. The vision was so detailed that Daniel could read the name tags on the officers' uniforms. Could hear the specific terminology they used to describe their experimental procedures. But most disturbing of all, he could see his own face reflected in the conference room's polished table, except it wasn't quite his face. The features were similar but younger, and the expression held a hardness that Daniel had never possessed. "Daniel, you're bleeding again," Sarah said urgently, pointing to fresh green stains spreading across his shirt. He looked down to see that several of the lumps on his chest had begun rupturing simultaneously, releasing more of the strange fluid than he'd experienced before. The substance was beginning to glow with a faint phosphorescence in the morning sunlight, creating an otherworldly quality that made his condition seem even more unnatural. "It's getting worse," Emma said, her 8-year-old voice carrying a fear that children shouldn't have to experience. Daniel knelt down beside his daughter, trying to project calm despite his growing panic about his deteriorating condition. "I know it looks scary, sweetheart, but Daddy's gonna be okay." We just need to get somewhere safe so the good doctors can help me." But even as he spoke the reassuring words, Daniel felt his confidence in their truth diminishing. The memory episodes were becoming more frequent and more intense, and each one seemed to reveal new layers of knowledge that shouldn't exist in his mind. He was beginning to suspect that Dr. Hayes' explanation that he was experiencing the after effects of a 60-year-old experiment might be only part of the truth. They reached the Henderson farmhouse as the sound of helicopters began to echo. Across the valley, Robert Henderson, a man in his 70s who'd known Daniel since childhood, took one look at their frightened faces and immediately invited them inside without questions. "Government trouble?" he asked, his weathered face creasing with concern. "Something like that," Daniel replied, grateful for the older man's understanding. Rural Montana had a long tradition of skepticism toward federal authority, and farmers like Henderson had their own reasons for avoiding unnecessary attention from officials. "You can use the storm cellar," Henderson offered. "It's well hidden and stocked with supplies. Built it during the Cold War when we thought the Russians might actually drop bombs on us." As they descended into the underground shelter, Daniel felt another surge of foreign knowledge. He knew, without being told, how long the cellar could sustain 3 people, what kind of ventilation systems it used, and how to modify its entrance to make detection more difficult. The familiarity was so complete that he found himself checking for features that were, indeed, present: emergency radio equipment, water filtration systems, even a cache of weapons that Henderson had apparently never mentioned to anyone. "How did you know about the weapons?" Henderson asked, noticing Daniel's immediate focus on the concealed gun cabinet. Daniel stared at the older man, unable to answer honestly because he didn't understand the answer himself. The knowledge in his mind was becoming more detailed and more foreign with each passing hour, as if someone else's lifetime of experience was slowly overwhelming his own memories and personality. Above them, the sound of helicopters grew louder, joined by the rumble of additional vehicles arriving at the Mercer house. Through the cellar's periscope, another feature Daniel had somehow known would be present. He could see military personnel establishing a perimeter around their property. "They're serious about this," Henderson observed, studying the activity through the periscope. "Haven't seen this much federal activity since the FBI was chasing those militia types back in '98. Daniel sat heavily on one of the cellar's wooden benches, feeling the full weight of their situation settling on his shoulders. His face was now leaking green fluid almost continuously, staining everything he touched. The memory episodes were occurring every few minutes, each one revealing more disturbing details about experiments and procedures he'd never been part of. Sarah sat beside him, taking his hand despite the strange fluid that now seemed to coat everything he touched. "We need to figure out what's really happening to you," she said quietly. "And we need to do it before those people up there decide to expand their search." Emma had curled up on a small cot in the corner of the cellar, exhausted by the morning's stress. As Daniel watched his daughter sleep, he felt a profound sense of loss for the normal life they'd been trying to rebuild. The peaceful homecoming he'd envisioned had become something resembling a military operation, with his own family as targets rather than beneficiaries of his service. The vintage military map he'd somehow sketched was still folded in his back pocket, its details becoming more meaningful as his condition progressed. He could now remember specific rooms within Facility X7, could visualize the faces of personnel who had worked there, could even recall conversations about memory implantation, procedures that had supposedly ended 60 years ago. But whose memories were these? And why was Daniel Mercer, a simple logistics sergeant from Montana, carrying around the detailed recollections of someone who had clearly been involved in classified military research at the highest levels? The answers, he was beginning to suspect, would require them to travel to Nevada and find a facility that officially didn't exist, if it still existed at all. The storm cellar's radio crackled to life at exactly 3:17 p.m., broadcasting an emergency alert that made Daniel's blood run cold. All units be advised. We have a bolo for Daniel Mercer, age 38, military veteran, considered armed and dangerous. Subject may be experiencing severe psychological disturbance. Approach with extreme caution. Henderson adjusted the radio's frequency, his weathered hands moving with practiced ease. "They're using the emergency broadcast system," he muttered. "Haven't heard that since 9/11's. Sarah pulled Emma closer, her daughter still sleeping despite the crackling radio static. "They're making you sound like a terrorist." Daniel felt another wave of foreign anger surge through his consciousness, not his own measured response to injustice, but someone else's volcanic fury at being hunted by his own government. Along with the emotion came tactical knowledge that was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. He knew how manhunts were conducted, how perimeters were established, and most disturbing of all, how subjects were typically eliminated when capture became inconvenient. "We need to contact Dr. Hayes," he said, fighting to maintain control over his increasingly fractured thoughts. "And we need to find others like me." Henderson produced a secure satellite phone from the cellar's communication equipment. "This line's encrypted and bounces off private satellites. Your government friends won't be able to trace it." As Daniel dialed Dr. Hayes' number, he experienced a flash of memory involving similar equipment, but in his vision, the phone was larger, more primitive, and he was using it to coordinate with other operatives during what appeared to be a covert mission. The knowledge of communication protocols felt automatic, as natural as breathing, yet he'd never received training in encrypted communications. "Dr. Hayes," came the voice through the phone speaker, tense with worry. "It's Daniel Mercer." "We didn't go with Colonel Bradford." A long pause. "Good. I was hoping you'd make that choice. Are you somewhere safe?" "For now. But my condition is accelerating. The lumps are rupturing more frequently, and the memory episodes are getting stronger." Daniel wiped green fluid from his cheek as he spoke. "I'm remembering things that never happened to me, detailed knowledge of military procedures I was never taught. That's consistent with what I've discovered in Dr. Whitman's personal journal. I found it yesterday in a storage unit that belonged to his estate. Daniel, the Desert Mirage experiments were worse than even the classified reports indicated." Sarah leaned closer to the phone. "How much worse?" The researchers weren't just trying to implant false memories. They were attempting to completely overlay existing personalities with constructed identities. The subjects would retain some of their original memories, but their dominant personality would belong to someone else entirely. In some cases, someone who had died. Daniel felt the cellar's walls seeming to close in around him. "Are you saying that Private Morrison wasn't just given false memories? He was given someone else's entire personality?" According to Dr. Whitman's journal, Morrison began exhibiting the knowledge and behavioral patterns of a Confederate cavalry officer named Captain James Butler, who died in 1863. Morrison could recite Butler's service record, knew intimate details about Civil War battles, even recognized photographs of Butler's family members, despite the fact that Butler had been dead for nearly a century. The implications were staggering. Daniel thought about his own recent tactical knowledge, his familiarity with procedures he'd never learned, his ability to sketch detailed facility layouts from places he'd never been. If Dr. Hayes was right, then his mind was being gradually taken over by someone else's memories and personality. "Doctor, I need to ask you something directly," Daniel said, his voice steady despite his growing fear. "Do you think I'm still me?" A long silence stretched across the encrypted connection. When Dr. Hayes spoke again, her voice carried the weight of unwelcome truth. "I think you're in transition, Daniel. Your original personality is still dominant, but it's being overlaid with memories and behavioral patterns from someone else. The question is whether we can reverse the process before the overlay becomes permanent. Emma stirred in Sarah's arms, blinking sleepily as the adult's tense conversation penetrated her dreams. "Daddy, are we still playing the hiding game?" "Yes, sweetheart," Daniel said softly, his heart breaking at his daughter's innocent trust. "We need to stay hidden a little longer." Dr. Hayes' voice continued through the phone speaker. "Daniel, I've been in contact with 3 other individuals experiencing similar symptoms. One is a veteran like yourself, Marcus Webb from Oregon. The other 2 are civilians with no military background whatsoever, but all of them are developing the same physical manifestations and reporting memory episodes involving military knowledge. They shouldn't possess. How many people are affected?" Sarah asked. "We don't know yet, but based on Dr. Whitman's journal entries, the Desert Mirage experiments continued sporadically for decades after 1962. The official program may have ended, but individual researchers kept working on the memory overlay technology. Whitman believed that some subjects were being processed as recently as the 1990s. Daniel felt a chill that had nothing to do with the underground cellar's temperature. "Are you saying this has been going on for 30 years? Possibly longer." Whitman's final journal entry is dated 1994, 2 years before his death. He wrote that he'd been contacted by government agents asking him to consult on a continuation of previous research. He refused, but he suspected the work was continuing without him. Henderson, who had been listening quietly while monitoring radio traffic, suddenly straightened. "Folks, we've got problems. The search teams are expanding their perimeter. They're bringing in dogs and thermal imaging equipment. This cellar will keep you hidden for a while, but not indefinitely." Daniel closed his eyes, accessing tactical knowledge that felt increasingly natural despite its foreign origin. The voice in his mind was becoming clearer, more distinct from his own thoughts. It belonged to someone with extensive experience in evading government manhunts, someone who had spent years planning for exactly this kind of situation. "There's a way out," he said, opening his eyes to meet Sarah's gaze. "But it means trusting knowledge that I'm not sure belongs to me." "What kind of way out?" Henderson asked. Daniel moved to the cellar's far wall, running his hands along the concrete until he found what the foreign memories told him would be there, a section that sounded hollow when tapped. Every Cold War shelter built in this area was connected to others through underground tunnels. The government wanted evacuation routes in case of nuclear attack. "How could you possibly know that?" Sarah demanded. "I don't know," Daniel admitted. "But I know there's a tunnel behind this wall that leads to the old Mackenzie place 3 miles north. And I know how to open it." His hands moved with practiced confidence, pressing specific points along the wall's surface until a section pivoted inward, revealing a narrow tunnel that disappeared into darkness. The air that flowed from the opening was stale and cold, carrying the scent of decades-old concrete and metal. Henderson stared at the hidden passage in amazement. "I've owned this property for 40 years and never knew that was there." "Because it was classified," Daniel replied, then stopped, disturbed by his own certainty. How could he know classification levels for construction projects that predated his birth? Sarah gathered Emma and their supplies, her face reflecting the same mixture of gratitude and fear that Daniel felt. The tunnel represented escape from their immediate danger, but it also confirmed that her husband possessed knowledge that couldn't be explained by his known life experience. "Dr. Hayes," Daniel said into the phone, "we're going to try to reach the Mackenzie property and then make contact with Marcus Webb. If what you're telling us is true, we need to find the other affected subjects and figure out who's really behind this. Be careful, Daniel. Colonel Bradford isn't acting alone. There's a significant organization working to keep Desert Mirage classified, and they have resources that go far beyond what we've seen so far." As they prepared to enter the tunnel, Daniel felt the personality overlay strengthening. The foreign memories were becoming more accessible, more detailed, and more emotionally resonant than his own experiences. Whoever's knowledge he was carrying had lived through decades of classified operations, had developed survival instincts honed by constant danger, and had prepared extensively for the possibility of being hunted by his own government. The most terrifying realization was that these borrowed survival skills might be the only thing that could keep his family alive. Daniel Mercer, logistics sergeant, would never have found the hidden tunnel or known how to evade a professional manhunt. But the other personality emerging in his mind, whoever that was, had been preparing for this scenario for years. As they descended into the darkness of the Cold War tunnel, Daniel wondered whether saving his family would require him to lose himself entirely to the stranger whose memories were slowly consuming his mind. Behind them, the sounds of the search grew fainter, but ahead lay only uncertainty and the growing realization that nothing about his life was what it seemed to be. The green fluid continued to seep from his deteriorating skin, leaving a faint, phosphorescent trail in the tunnel's darkness, a literal beacon marking their passage through the underground maze that someone else's memories were guiding them through. The tunnel led them through nearly an hour of crawling through Cold War-era concrete passages before emerging in the basement of the abandoned Mackenzie farmhouse. Marcus Webb was waiting for them in the darkened living room, his face illuminated by the glow of a laptop computer. When he turned toward the sound of their footsteps, Daniel felt a shock of recognition that went beyond their phone conversations. Marcus was roughly his own age, with dark hair and intelligent brown eyes that carried the same haunted quality Daniel had been seeing in his own mirror. The most striking were the lumps scattered across the right side of Marcus's face and neck, identical in appearance to Daniel's condition, but further progressed. Several had clearly ruptured and healed, leaving behind scarred cavities that gave his profile a disturbing asymmetry. "Daniel," Marcus said, standing to greet them. His voice carried traces of an accent that seemed to shift between regions, sometimes southern, sometimes midwestern, occasionally something that sounded almost foreign. "I'm glad you made it. We have a lot to discuss." Sarah settled Emma on an old couch, covering her with a blanket they brought from the cellar. Their daughter had remained remarkably composed throughout their underground journey, but exhaustion was finally overtaking her adrenaline. "How long have you been experiencing symptoms?" Daniel asked, studying Marcus's condition with the clinical detachment that was becoming his default response to the horrific. "First lumps appeared 8 months ago. Started on my face, just like yours," Marcus gestured to his scarred profile. "But I've been having the memory episodes for almost 2 years." "2 years?" Sarah's voice rose with alarm. "You mean this condition has been developing for 2 years?" Marcus nodded grimly. "The memories came first. I started having dreams about places I'd never been, knowledge of procedures I'd never learned. At first I thought it was PTSD from my deployment in Iraq. Then the dreams became more frequent, more detailed, and I realized they weren't dreams at all. They were someone else's memories." He moved to his laptop and turned the screen toward them. The display showed a detailed timeline tracking his symptoms, complete with photographs documenting the progression of his physical condition and notes describing each memory episode. "I've been documenting everything," Marcus explained. "Medical symptoms, psychological changes, attempts to research what's happening to us. What I've discovered is that we're not the first generation of subjects." Daniel studied the laptop screen, noting the methodical approach Marcus had taken to understanding their shared condition. The timeline showed clear patterns. Memory episodes typically preceded physical symptoms by several months. The lumps always began on one side of the face, and the green fluid appeared only after the foreign memories had reached a certain level of detail and emotional resonance. "Tell me about the memories," Daniel said. "Whose experiences are you carrying?" Marcus's expression became distant. as if he were accessing files stored in a separate part of his consciousness. Sergeant Tommy Morrison, 82nd Airborne, died September 1962. But that's not all. I also have fragments from Captain William Hayes, Army Intelligence, died 1967, and pieces of Major Robert Chen, Special Forces, died 1973. Multiple personalities? Sarah asked, her voice barely steady. Multiple memory sets, Marcus corrected. It's like having several different people's life experiences stored in my head, but they're all fragmentary. I remember Tommy Morrison's basic training, but not his childhood. I know Captain Hayes' intelligence protocols, but not his family relationships. It's as if someone extracted specific types of memories from multiple sources and combined them into a single collection. Daniel felt a surge of understanding that didn't come from his own analytical abilities. The foreign voice in his mind was providing explanations with the authority of someone who had direct experience with memory extraction procedures. They were building composite soldiers, he said, the words emerging with certainty that surprised him, taking the best skills and knowledge from multiple sources and creating enhanced operatives. Marcus stared at him. How do you know that? I don't know how I know it, but I do. Daniel touched the latest lump to appear on his neck, feeling the warm fluid moving beneath the surface. The voice in my head, the one that doesn't belong to me, it has detailed knowledge of the procedures used to create us. Create us? Sarah repeated, her face pale with growing horror. I don't think we're random victims, Daniel continued, accessing memories that felt increasingly like his own despite their impossible origin. We were selected, chosen for specific reasons, then processed to carry the memories and skills of dead soldiers. Marcus minimized his medical timeline and opened a different file, a collection of documents he'd apparently acquired through methods that Daniel's enhanced tactical knowledge recognized as sophisticated intelligence gathering. I've been researching our backgrounds, Marcus said, looking for patterns, connections, anything that might explain why we were chosen. What I found is disturbing. The first document was Daniel's military service record, but it contained details that didn't match his memories. According to the official file, he'd served not just as a logistics coordinator, but as part of a special assignment program that involved temporary duty with classified units. There were gaps in his service timeline periods of several weeks, where his location was listed simply as TDY Special Assignment. I don't remember any special assignments, Daniel said, studying the records with growing confusion. Neither did one, Marcus replied. But my service record shows the same pattern. Temporary duty assignments to units that don't exist in any official military database. And look at this. He opened another file showing their medical records from their enlistment physicals. Both Daniel and Marcus had been classified as having exceptional psychological profiles for memory retention and personality flexibility. Their psychological evaluations included detailed assessments of their susceptibility to suggestion and their ability to integrate conflicting information streams. They were screening for subjects even before we enlisted, Sarah realized her voice heavy with the implications. It gets worse, Marcus said, opening an audio file on his laptop. I found this recording in Dr. Whitman's effects. It's his personal log from 1994, 2 years before he died. Dr. Whitman's voice filled the cellar, aged and trembling with what sounded like profound regret. The program never ended. They told us it was terminated in 1967, but I've learned that new subjects are being processed every few years. Young soldiers, carefully selected during recruitment, given false service. Records to explain gaps in their memories. They're creating an army of enhanced operatives, each one carrying the knowledge and skills of multiple deceased soldiers. God forgive me, I helped them perfect the technology. The recording continued. The new process is more sophisticated than What we developed in the 1960s. The memory overlays are more complete, more integrated with the subject's original personality. But the physical side effects remain the same: the brown lumps, the green fluid, the eventual rejection of foreign memories. Most subjects die within 2 to 3 years of activation, but by then, they've completed whatever missions they were designed for. Daniel felt his hands shaking as the implications became clear. Missions? Marcus paused the recording. I've been having dreams about operations I never participated in. Detailed recollections of covert missions in places I've never been. Intelligence gathering, assassination operations, facility infiltrations. And according to my research, these dreams correspond to real classified operations that took place during the periods when my service record shows those mysterious T assignments. You think we were unknowingly used as operatives? Sarah asked, her voice filled with horror. I think we were turned into operatives, Daniel replied, the foreign knowledge in his mind providing answers with disturbing clarity. Our memories of routine military service were implanted to cover the real assignments we were given while under the influence of the personality overlays. He moved to the window and peered through the dusty glass at the government vehicles still visible in the distance around his family's property. The manhunt was being conducted with resources that seemed excessive for a single veteran with a medical condition, unless that veteran possessed classified knowledge that multiple governments would kill to protect. There's something else, Marcus said, opening another file on his laptop. I've been in contact with 2 other subjects, a woman named Patricia Kahn from Seattle and a man called James Torres from Phoenix. Neither of them has military backgrounds, but they're both developing identical symptoms and experiencing memory episodes involving classified government operations. Civilians? Sarah stood and moved to join Daniel at the window. How is that possible? Dr. Whitman's journal suggests they expanded the program in the 1980s to include civilian subjects. People who had security clearances through their jobs, defense contractors, government employees, even some medical professionals. Anyone who could provide plausible cover for carrying classified knowledge. Daniel felt another memory episode, beginning stronger and more detailed than any previous experience. This time, he saw himself in what appeared to be a briefing room, but not the vintage 1960s facility from his earlier visions. This was modern, with contemporary equipment and personnel wearing current military uniforms. The general was explaining an operation codenamed Memory Palace, while displaying photographs of targets in various international locations. But most disturbing of all, Daniel could feel the emotional resonance of the mission, the professional satisfaction of completing objectives, the tactical analysis of target vulnerabilities, the methodical planning that went into each operation. These weren't just visual memories. They carried the full emotional and psychological context of someone who had lived through extensive covert operations. When the episode ended, Daniel found himself staring at Marcus with new understanding. How many operations have you remembered participating in? 17 over the past 6 years, Marcus replied without hesitation. Mostly intelligence gathering and facility reconnaissance. But some were more direct action operations that would have required eliminating targets who posed security threats. Sarah sank into a chair, the full scope of their situation finally becoming clear. You're both trained killers who don't remember being trained. We're weapons, Daniel said quietly, the words emerging from the foreign personality that was becoming increasingly dominant in his thoughts. Enhanced operatives carrying the skills and knowledge of multiple deceased specialists. We were activated for specific missions, then returned to civilian life with false memories to cover what we'd done. Emma's sleepy voice drifted from the couch. Daddy, why do you sound different? The innocent question hit Daniel like a physical blow. Even his 80-year-old daughter could sense that something fundamental was changing in his personality. The voice emerging from his mouth was becoming harder, more controlled, carrying inflections and speech patterns that belonged to someone else. "I'm just tired, sweetheart," he said. But even as he spoke the reassuring words, he could hear the foreign personality bleeding through his tone. Marcus resumed playing Dr. Whitman's audio journal. The dead researcher's voice continued. "The most disturbing development is the emergence of what we're calling personality dominance in long-term subjects. The overlaid memories begin to override the original personality entirely. The subject retains their physical identity and basic personal relationships, but their core consciousness gradually shifts to match the implanted experiences. In essence, they become someone else while remaining biologically themselves." "How long does that process take?" Sarah asked, though her expression suggested she feared the answer. "According to our observations, complete personality transition occurs between 18 months and 3 years after initial memory implantation. The physical symptoms, the lumps and green fluid, appear to brain's final attempt to reject the foreign memories before surrendering to them entirely." Daniel felt the terrible logic of their situation crystallizing. His condition wasn't just a medical crisis. It was a countdown to losing his fundamental identity. The tactical knowledge flooding his mind belonged to whoever the government had chosen to overlay onto his original personality. Soon, Daniel Mercer would exist only as a biological shell housing someone else's consciousness. "We need to find Facility X7, he said, the foreign voice now speaking with equal authority to his own thoughts. "The answers are there, along with whatever technology they used to create us." Marcus nodded, saving his files and preparing to shut down his laptop. "I've been tracing the location using the geographical references in Dr. Whitman's notes. The facility is still active, but it's been relocated and expanded significantly since 1962. How far? Approximately 18 hours of driving, assuming we can avoid the roadblocks they'll have set up by now." Marcus shouldered a backpack filled with equipment and supplies. "But there's something else you need to know before we commit to this course of action." He pulled up a final file, a collection of death certificates and missing person reports spanning 6 decades. Every subject who has ever attempted to find and confront the people responsible for their condition has disappeared. Some were found dead, apparently from accelerated disease progression. Others simply vanished without trace. Daniel studied the documents, recognizing names from Dr. Whitman's journal and seeing the pattern of systematic elimination that had protected the program's secrecy for over 60 years. "So our choice is die slowly from the condition or die quickly from opposing the people who created it," Sarah said, her voice flat with exhaustion. "There might be a third option," Daniel replied, though the words came from the foreign personality rather than his own hope. "If we can reach the facility and access their memory extraction technology, we might be able to reverse the overlay process. And if we can't..." Daniel looked at his wife and daughter, seeing his own face reflected in their frightened expressions, but feeling the emotional responses of someone else entirely. The foreign personality was taking over so gradually that he was beginning to lose track of which thoughts and feelings belonged to his original identity. "Then, at least we'll know the truth about who we really are," he said, hearing the stranger's voice emerge more clearly from his own mouth. "And maybe we can ensure that no one else goes through this." Above them, the sound of search helicopters continued to circle, but Daniel's enhanced tactical awareness told him they had perhaps 6 hours before the manhunt would expand to include the Mackenzie property. 6 hours to decide whether to fight for his original identity or surrender to whoever the government had chosen him to become. The choice, he was beginning to suspect, might already be out of his hands. The photograph arrived by courier at exactly 2:30 a.m., slipped under the door of the Mackenzie farmhouse while the family slept in shifts. Marcus found it when he completed his security patrol, a ritual that Daniel's foreign memories insisted was necessary every 2 hours. The image was black and white, obviously from the 1960s, showing a young soldier in dress uniform with earnest eyes and a confident smile. "Sergeant Tommy Morrison," Marcus said quietly, handing the photograph to Daniel. "Someone wants us to know exactly whose memories we're carrying." Daniel studied the image, feeling an unsettling sense of familiarity that went beyond the physical resemblance between Morrison's face and his own condition. Looking at the photograph triggered a cascade of personal memories that couldn't possibly belong to him. Tommy's last letter home to his sister, his nervousness about volunteering for the medical experiment, his growing suspicion that the researchers weren't telling him the truth about their procedures. "I remember him writing to his sister about wanting to save money for her wedding," Daniel said, then stopped, disturbed by the intimacy of the recollection. "These aren't just his military memories. I have access to his personal life, his emotions, his relationships with people I've never met." Sarah had been awake since midnight, unable to sleep while her husband paced the farmhouse with the restless energy of someone whose personality was fragmenting in real time. She'd watched him check and recheck the windows, examine the perimeter through infrared binoculars that Marcus had somehow acquired, and demonstrate familiarity with security protocols that neither man should have known. "Dr. Hayes called while you were on patrol," she told them. "She's discovered something about our marriage certificate." Daniel felt his stomach clench. "What about it?" "The original document in the county records shows a different date from the copy we have at home. According to the official files, we were married in 2008, not 2012. And there are witness signatures from people neither of us remembers being at our wedding." The implications were staggering. Daniel's memories of their courtship, proposal, and wedding ceremony felt completely authentic. He could recall every detail of the ceremony, the song they danced to, even the taste of the cake. But if the official records were different, then some of his most precious personal memories might be fabrications. "They didn't just give us military knowledge," he realized, his voice hollow with growing horror. "They restructured our entire personal histories." Marcus nodded grimly. "I discovered the same discrepancies in my background 2 months ago. My college transcripts show degrees I don't remember earning, from universities I never attended. My employment history includes jobs with defense contractors that I have no memory of working for. Even my apartment lease was signed in handwriting that matches mine perfectly, but I don't remember ever living at that address." Emma stirred on the law couch, mumbling something in her sleep that made Daniel's heart ache. How much of his relationship with his daughter was real? Had he actually been present for her birth? Or was that another implanted memory designed to provide emotional stability for his constructed identity? "The courier who delivered the photograph," Marcus continued. "I caught a glimpse of him through the window. He was wearing civilian clothes, but he moved like military, probably special operations background. And he left something else." He handed Daniel a small electronic device that looked like a modified smartphone. "Encrypted communicator. It's been receiving messages for the past hour." Daniel activated the device, accessing its interface with knowledge that definitely didn't belong to his original personality. The communications were coded, but he found himself translating them automatically using protocols he'd never been taught. The messages were from other subjects, people experiencing similar symptoms and memory overlays across the country. Patricia Kahn from Seattle reported that her lumps had begun rupturing, releasing green fluid that was testing positive for exotic proteins. James Torres from Phoenix had experienced complete personality replacement for several hours, during which he'd spoken exclusively in Russian and demonstrated knowledge of Soviet intelligence procedures from the 1970s. Most disturbing was a message from someone identified only as Subject 23. Full personality integration achieved. Original identity 73% suppressed. Mission parameters now accessible. Awaiting activation orders. They're not trying to help us, Daniel said, the foreign voice speaking with absolute certainty. This is activation protocol. Someone is triggering. The final phase of our programming. Sarah moved to the window, peering through the curtains at the empty countryside beyond. What kind of final phase? The personality overlays aren't random, Daniel replied, accessing knowledge that felt both foreign and intimately familiar. Each of us was given specific skill sets for specific types of operations. When enough subjects reach full integration, they'll be activated as a coordinated unit for some kind of major operation. Marcus pulled up another file on his laptop, a map showing the locations of all known subjects experiencing symptoms. The pattern was clear. They were distributed across major metropolitan areas and strategic military installations throughout the United States, positioned like pieces on a chessboard waiting to be moved. How many of us are there? Sarah asked. At least 47 active subjects based on the communication traffic, Marcus replied. But Dr. Whitman's journal suggests they've been creating enhanced operatives for decades. Some have already completed their missions and been retired, either through natural death as their conditions progressed or through more direct means. Daniel felt another memory episode beginning. This one involving detailed knowledge of assassination techniques and methods for eliminating security threats. The memories were so complete that he could visualize specific targets, access their personal information and daily routines, and plan approaches that would minimize risk of detection. But these weren't his memories, and the emotions accompanying them, the cold professional satisfaction of completed eliminations, belonged to someone whose moral framework was fundamentally different from his own. I'm losing myself, he said quietly, the admission carrying more weight than any physical symptom. The other personality is becoming stronger, more detailed. Sometimes I can't tell which thoughts are mine and which belong to whoever they overlaid onto my consciousness. Sarah took his hand, careful to avoid the areas where green fluid was seeping through his skin. We'll figure this out. We'll find a way to get you back. But Daniel could see the doubt in her eyes, the growing recognition that the man she'd married might already be disappearing beneath layers of foreign memories and reconstructed identity. Even Emma seemed to sense the change, clinging more tightly to her mother and watching Daniel with the wariness children. Reserved for strangers. The encrypted communicator buzzed with another message, this one carrying an urgency that made Daniel's enhanced tactical awareness respond with immediate alarm. The message was brief, but ominous. Facility breach detected. All active subjects report to designated rally points for immediate extraction. Non-compliance will result in termination. Authorization. They know we're researching the program, Marcus said, reading the message over Daniel's shoulder. Someone's been monitoring our communications despite the encryption. Daniel's foreign memories provided instant analysis of their tactical situation. The rally points would be kill zones designed to eliminate subjects who had become too aware of their true nature. The extraction would be permanent, ensuring that Operation Desert Mirage remained classified. We have perhaps 12 hours before they locate this facility, he said, the foreign personality's expertise overriding his civilian reluctance to accept the worst-case scenario. We need to reach Nevada and find the original facility before they activate termination protocols for all remaining subjects. What about Emma? Sarah demanded. We can't take an 8-year-old into whatever we're going to find out there. Daniel looked at his daughter, feeling a complex mixture of emotions that seemed to belong to multiple personalities simultaneously. His original identity felt overwhelming love and protectiveness, but the foreign memories carried the cold calculation of someone who understood that personal attachments could compromise mission effectiveness. Henderson will keep her safe, he said, though the words felt like they were tearing something vital from his chest. This is about more than just my condition now. If they're activating subjects nationwide for some kind of coordinated operation, we might be the only ones who can stop it." Marcus was already packing his equipment, moving with the efficient urgency of someone accustomed to rapid deployment. "The facility is heavily guarded, and our approach will need to account for multiple layers of security. But if Dr. Whitman's notes are accurate, they keep samples of the original memory extraction technology at the site." "For research purposes?" Sarah asked. "For reversal procedures," Daniel replied, though he realized the knowledge was coming from the farm personality rather than Hope. Every enhanced operative eventually becomes a security risk as their condition progresses. They need the ability to extract compromised memories before terminating subjects. The green fluid leaking from his deteriorating skin had begun to glow more brightly in the darkened farmhouse, creating an otherworldly phosphorescence that seemed to pulse in rhythm with his heartbeat. But more disturbing than the physical changes was his growing emotional detachment from his original life and relationships. He was beginning to understand the real horror of Operation Desert Mirage, not just the death that awaited subjects like Tommy Morrison, but the gradual erasure of their fundamental identity long before their bodies finally succumbed to the foreign memories trying to consume them. As they prepared to leave the Mackenzie farmhouse and begin their journey toward Nevada, Daniel wondered whether saving other subjects would require him to fully surrender to the enhanced operative whose memories were systematically replacing his own. The tactical knowledge flooding his consciousness suggested that success would depend on embracing the farm personality's skills and experience. But doing so might mean that Daniel Mercer, husband and father from Pine Ridge, Montana, would cease to exist long before they reached Facility X7, leaving only the enhanced operative wearing his face to complete whatever mission had been implanted in his reconstructed mind. The break-in occurred while they were making final preparations for the journey to Nevada. Sarah had been gathering medical supplies when she heard the sound of splintering wood from the cellar, above government agents searching the Henderson property with the systematic thoroughness of professionals who had time and unlimited resources. "They found us," Marcus whispered, immediately beginning to erase the files on his laptop. But Daniel was experiencing something far more disturbing than the arrival of hostile forces. Another memory episode had begun, this one more intense and complete than anything he'd experienced before. He saw himself in Dr. Whitman's laboratory, but not as a subject lying on an examination table. He was standing beside the researcher, wearing a white coat and taking notes while Whitman explained the memory overlay procedures to him. In the vision, Daniel could read his own name tag, Dr. Harold Whitman, Jr., research assistant. But that was impossible. Daniel had never met Dr. Whitman, had never studied medicine, had never been involved in any kind of scientific research. The episode continued, showing him participating in the memory extraction procedures, watching his subjects were connected to complex machinery that resembled both medical equipment and some kind of advanced computer interface. He could see himself making adjustments to the settings, monitoring subjects' vital signs, even making recommendations about memory integration protocols. "Sarah," he said urgently, grabbing her arm as the sounds of search teams grew closer above. "Ma'am, I need to tell you something that doesn't make sense." "What?" "I think I might have been one of the researchers, not one of the subjects." Sarah stared at him in shock. "That's impossible. You're 38 years old. The experiments ended before you were born. But what if they didn't end? What if Daniel Mercer never existed at all?" The words hung in the air like a death sentence as the sounds of boots on the floor above grew louder. Marcus had finished destroying his digital files and was now preparing to access what appeared to be a hidden weapons cache behind a false wall panel. "You're not making sense," Sarah said, but her voice carried a growing uncertainty that suggested she was. beginning to question everything they thought they knew about their shared life. Daniel pulled out his wallet and removed his driver's license. Studying it with eyes that were seeing details he'd never noticed before. The photograph looked like him. The personal information matched his memories. But there was something subtly wrong with the document itself. The typography was slightly off. The holographic security features were too advanced for when it was supposedly issued, and the wear patterns didn't match what 12 years of normal use should have created. "Look at this," he said, showing the license to Sarah and Marcus. "Really look at it." Marcus examined the document with the analytical skills that were becoming second nature to all of them. "The microprinting is wrong for a Montana license, issued in 2010, and the magnetic strip encoding uses a format that wasn't adopted until 2018. My entire identity is fabricated." Daniel realized the foreign memories providing confirmation with devastating clarity. Birth certificate, social security records, military service history, all of it created to provide cover for whoever I really am. Sarah sank into a chair, the full implications finally hitting her. Then who did I marry? Who was Emma's father? Before Daniel could attempt an answer, the cellar door burst open and armed figures in tactical gear began descending the stairs. But instead of government agents, the first person to emerge was Dr. Hayes, followed by two other individuals Daniel didn't recognize. "We need to move now," Dr. Hayes said urgently, carrying a large medical bag and what appeared to be portable computer equipment. "The facility has been compromised, and they're activating all remaining subjects for immediate termination." "Dr. Hayes?" Sarah stood uncertainly. "How did you find us?" "Because I've been tracking Subject 47 for the past 3 years," Dr. Hayes replied, her tone carrying a gravity that made Daniel's enhanced paranoia respond with immediate alarm. "And because it's time you learned the truth about who you really are." She opened her medical bag and withdrew a manila folder thick with documents. "Daniel, your real name is Harold Whitman, Jr. You're my nephew, and you've been missing for 38 years. The revelation hit Daniel like a physical blow. The foreign memories suddenly recontextualized themselves, not as implanted experiences from dead soldiers, but as suppressed recollections from his own past. He could now access childhood memories of Dr. Hayes' Aunt Margaret visiting there, family home, of his father's secret research work, of the day everything changed when he was 8 years old. "I remember you," he said slowly, his voice carrying wonder and horror in equal measure. "You used to bring me books about science, told me stories about famous inventors. But Dad made you stop visiting after he started working on the classified project." Dr. Hayes nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Your father continued the Desert Mirage research in secret after the official program ended. He believed he could perfect the memory overlay technology, make it safer and more precise. You were his first test subject, his own 8-year-old. "Son, that's impossible," Sarah protested. "Daniel has a complete life history. We've been married for 12 years. We have a daughter together. He served in the military." "All implanted," Dr. Hayes said gently. Harold Daniel was given the complete identity of a man who actually died in childhood. The real Daniel. Mercer died of leukemia at age 8 in 1995. Your father acquired his identity and used it as the foundation for a new personality overlay. Marcus had been listening with growing understanding. The Enhanced Operatives Program. They weren't just implanting military memories. They were creating entirely new people. Complete identity reconstruction, Dr. Hayes confirmed. Take a child young enough for the procedure to be successful. Overlay them with the memories and personality of someone who died. Then add specialized knowledge and skills as needed. Harold became Daniel Mercer, complete with false childhood, memories, fabricated military service, and even constructed relationships. Daniel felt his sense of reality dissolving as more suppressed memories surfaced. He could now recall being strapped to the memory extraction device as a child, his father explaining that the procedure would make him special, the gradual replacement of his original personality with the constructed identity of Daniel Mercer. "Sarah," he said, his voice breaking, "our marriage was part of your cover identity," Dr. Hayes said softly. "But the emotions you feel for her and Emma are real. That's the crucial difference between older overlay procedures and what your father developed. He learned to preserve authentic emotional capacity while replacing factual memories and learned behaviors." Sarah was staring at Daniel with an expression of profound loss. "So the man I married doesn't exist? Never existed?" "The man you married is standing right here," Dr. Hayes replied firmly. "But his name isn't Daniel Mercer, and his background isn't what you believed. The person you fell in love with, his personality, his capacity for love, his fundamental character, that's Harold Whitman, my nephew, who's been trapped inside a false identity for 3 decades." The sounds of helicopters were growing closer, and Marcus was monitoring radio traffic that suggested their location had been compromised. But Daniel found himself paralyzed by the magnitude of what he was learning about his own identity. "Why now?" he asked. "Why are the memories surfacing after all these years?" "Because the overlay technology was never perfect," Dr. Hayes explained, checking her watch with growing urgency. "Eventually, the brain begins to reject foreign memories, just like an immune system rejecting a transplanted organ. The lumps and green fluid are physical manifestations of that rejection. But more importantly, the process allows suppressed original memories to surface. And the government can't allow that to happen," Marcus added, understanding the tactical implications. "If subjects start remembering their real identities and the procedures used to create them, the entire program becomes exposed," Daniel felt. The 2 personalities in his mind, Harold Whitman and Daniel Mercer, beginning to integrate rather than conflict. Harold's memories provided context for the advanced knowledge he'd been accessing, while Daniel's constructed experiences gave him the emotional stability and relationships that made life meaningful. "There's more," Dr. Hayes said, pulling additional documents from her folder. "Your father didn't stop with creating individual enhanced operatives. He developed a method for networking their minds, allowing multiple subjects to share information and coordinate activities unconsciously. She showed them brain scans that revealed unusual neural pathway formations in the subjects, brain structures that appeared to function like biological radio transmitters, allowing enhanced operatives to communicate without conscious awareness. We're all connected," Daniel realized, understanding suddenly why he'd felt such immediate recognition when meeting Marcus. "Our minds are linked through whatever technology Dad used to create the memory overlays, which means they can track you," Marcus said grimly. "And it means they can trigger coordinated behavior in all subjects simultaneously." As if summoned by their conversation, Daniel felt a sudden compulsion to access the encrypted communicator and respond to the activation signals. The urge was overwhelming, feeling like a fundamental biological need rather than a conscious choice. Part of his mind was trying to send coordinates of their current location to unknown receivers. "Fight it," Dr. Hayes said, recognizing the signs of external control activation. "The compulsion will pass, but you need to resist the urge to comply with any signals you're receiving." The cellar door burst open again, and this time it was Colonel Bradford himself leading a team of armed operatives. But instead of surrounding them with weapons drawn, Bradford approached with his hands visible and his expression suggesting negotiation rather than confrontation. "Dr. Hayes," he said formally, "you're interfering with a national security operation." "I'm trying to save my nephew's life," she replied without backing down. "Your nephew has been dead for 30 years. The man standing beside you is Subject 47, a classified military asset created by your brother's research. He belongs to United States government and his activation is necessary for current operational requirements. Daniel felt the two personalities, in his mind responding differently to Bradford's words. The Daniel Mercer identity felt outrage at being called government property, but the Harold Whitman personality carried memories of his father's research and understood exactly what Bradford meant. "What operational requirements?" Harold asked, his voice carrying authority that Daniel had never possessed. Bradford smiled with the satisfaction of someone who recognized that he was now dealing with the enhanced operative rather than the confused subject. "International crisis developing in Eastern Europe. We need assets with your particular skill set to conduct reconnaissance and possible direct action against hostile intelligence services." "My particular skill set," Harold repeated, accessing memories that revealed the full scope of what his father had created. Memory integration from 12 different special operations personnel, linguistic capabilities covering 7 languages, and tactical knowledge spanning 6 decades of classified operations. "Precisely. You're one of our most valuable assets." "Harold, it's time to stop playing house with borrowed memories and accept your real purpose." Sarah stepped between them, her face fierce with protective instinct. "He has a daughter, a family, a life that matters more than your military operations. He has a constructed identity designed to provide emotional stability during dormant periods," Bradford corrected Colby. "The child was part of the cover story, not a real relationship." Emma's voice drifted from the couch where she'd awakened during their intense conversation. "Daddy, why is that man saying mean things about me?" The innocent question shattered something fundamental in Daniel's reconstructed psyche. Both personalities, Harold and Daniel, responded with identical fierce protectiveness. Whatever the truth about his identity, whatever the government had done to create him, Emma was real, and she was his daughter in every way that mattered, because he's forgotten that some things are more important than national security. Daniel replied, feeling both personalities aligning for the first time since his condition had begun. Bradford's expression hardened. Subject 47. You will comply with activation protocols or face immediate termination. Your family will be relocated and provided with appropriate cover memories to explain your disappearance. Cover memories for them too? Sarah asked, her voice filled with horror. Standard procedure for compromised assets. They'll remember Daniel. Mercer dying in a training accident. Sad, but clean, and it protects operational security. The casual way Bradford discussed erasing his family's memories of their life together triggered something primal in Daniel's consciousness. Both Harold and Daniel Mercer were united in their absolute refusal to allow Emma and Sarah to be subjected to the same violation of identity that had created him. No, he said simply, the word carrying the finality of someone who had reached an unshakable decision. Bradford nodded as if he'd expected this response. Then you leave us no alternative. He gestured to his operatives, who began moving with the coordinated precision of a team, preparing to eliminate multiple targets. But Daniel was already responding with tactical skills that belonged to both his identities. Harold's scientific knowledge of the facility's vulnerabilities, combined with Daniel's protective instincts and Tommy Morrison's combat experience. The confrontation that followed would determine not just their survival, but whether the truth about Operation Desert Mirage would finally be exposed or buried along with everyone who had discovered it. The confrontation in the cellar lasted exactly 47 seconds. Timed with the precision of someone whose enhanced memories included extensive close-quarters combat training. Daniel moved with fluid efficiency that belonged to multiple overlaid personalities. Harold's analytical understanding of human anatomy, Tommy Morrison's battlefield reflexes, and tactical knowledge from at least 3 other deceased special operations personnel. When it was over, Colonel Bradford and his team were unconscious but alive, secured with restraints that Marcus had produced from his seemingly endless supply of specialized equipment. Daniel stood over Bradford's prone form, his hands shaking not from adrenaline but from the realization that he'd acted with lethal capabilities he'd never consciously developed. "We need to move," Dr. Hayes said, checking Bradford's pulse while efficiently searching his pockets for intelligence. This was a forward team. The main force will respond to their silence within 30 minutes. She'd found Bradford's encrypted communicator and was scrolling through recent messages with the expertise of someone familiar with military communications protocols. They've already activated 17 subjects nationwide. The operation they're planning is scheduled for tonight. Coordinated strikes against foreign intelligence installations in 12 major cities. "Terrorist attacks?" Sarah asked, her voice hollow with horror. "False flag operations," Daniel replied, the answer emerging from Howard's scientific understanding combined with tactical analysis from his overlaid military memories. "They'll blame the attacks on foreign agents while using enhanced operatives to eliminate actual intelligence threats. Clean, deniable, and it removes subjects who are becoming security risks." Marcus was studying a master list of targets displayed on Bradford's device: government facilities, foreign consulates, and what appears to be research installations where other countries might be developing their own memory overlay technology. They're not just covering up Desert Mirage, Dr. Hayes realized. They're using it as a weapon to maintain America's intelligence advantage. Emma had remained remarkably calm during the brief violence, but Daniel could see the psychological toll in her wide, frightened eyes. His daughter was witnessing the complete dissolution of everything she'd understood about her family and her father's identity. "Sweetheart," he said, kneeling beside her with movements that were becoming more controlled and precise as the foreign personalities strengthened. "I need you to understand something important. No matter what anyone says about who I am or where I came from, you are my daughter, and I love you more than anything in the world." "Are you still my daddy?" Emma asked, her voice small and confused. "I'm still your daddy," Daniel replied, though he wondered if that would remain true much longer. The Harold Whitman personality was providing access to memories that painted a very different picture of his identity and capabilities. Dr. Hayes had been monitoring radio traffic and now looked up with urgent concern. "We have a 15-minute window before the next wave arrives. But there's something else you need to know before we attempt to reach the facility." She opened her medical bag and withdrew a device that looked like a modified tablet computer. "This is a memory scanner based on technology your father developed in the 1990s. It can map the neural pathways created by personality, overlays and distinguish between original and implanted memories." "You want to scan, Daniel?" Sarah asked. "I want to show you what we're really dealing with." Dr. Hayes activated the device and held it near Daniel's head. The screen filled with a complex three-dimensional map of neural activity, showing patterns in different colors that presumably represented different types of memories. What they saw was devastating. The vast majority of Daniel's neural pathways were highlighted in red, indicating implanted memories. Only small clusters showed the blue coloring that represented original experiences, and even those were fragmented and incomplete. "How much of me is real?" Daniel asked, staring at the evidence of his reconstructed identity. "Approximately 12%, Dr. Hayes replied with clinical honesty. "The rest is overlay material from multiple sources." "But Daniel, those 12% represent your core emotional capacity, your fundamental personality traits, your ability to love and form authentic relationships. That's why your feelings for Sarah and Emma are genuine, despite the false memories surrounding them." Sarah was studying the scanner display with growing understanding. "So he really does love us, but he might not remember how we met or when we got married?" "The emotional bonds are authentic, but the specific memories supporting them are largely fabricated. Your father was brilliant, Harold. He learned to preserve what made people human while reconstructing everything else about their identity. Daniel felt another wave of suppressed memories surfacing, this time showing him as a child in his father's laboratory, volunteering to help with the research because he wanted to be like the great Dr. Whitman. He could remember his father's excitement when the first personality overlay succeeded, could recall his own pride at being chosen as the next test subject. "I volunteered," he said with growing horror. "When I was 8 years old, I volunteered to have my personality replaced because I thought it would make Dad proud of me." "Children can't give informed consent for that kind of procedure," Dr. Hayes said firmly. "Your father convinced himself. He was creating something wonderful, but what he did to you was unforgivable." The sound of approaching helicopters interrupted their conversation. Marcus had been monitoring the perimeter and now reported that at least 6 aircraft were converging on their location, along with what appeared to be a full company of ground forces. "They're not taking any chances this time," he said grimly. "Whatever we're going to do, we need to do it now." Dr. Hayes shouldered her equipment bag and moved toward a section of the cellar wall that Daniel's enhanced memories told him concealed another hidden passage. The tunnel system extends all the way to Nevada. It was built during the 1950s as part of a classified transportation network for moving sensitive materials and personnel. "A tunnel from Montana to Nevada?" Sarah asked incredulously. "Underground. Maglev system," Daniel replied automatically, then stopped, disturbed by how naturally the classified information emerged. "Developed for transporting nuclear materials and research subjects between facilities without detection." "How could you possibly know about maglev technology from the 1950s? Sarah demanded. "Because Harold helped design the route," Dr. Hayes said quietly. "After your father overlaid you with the Daniel Mercer identity, he continued using your enhanced capabilities for his research. You've been traveling to the Nevada facility regularly for 30 years, but those trips were erased from your conscious memory after each visit." Daniel felt the two personalities in his mind finally beginning to merge rather than conflict. Harold's memories of the underground transport system, combined with Daniel's protective instincts and the tactical knowledge from multiple overlaid military personnel. The integration was creating something new, not quite Harold, not quite Daniel, but a synthesis that carried the strengths of both identities. "The memory extraction technology at the facility," he said, understanding beginning to dawn. "It's not just for reversing overlays. It's for creating new ones. Your father has been perfecting the process for decades," Dr. Hayes confirmed. "The current subjects, you, Marcus, the others experiencing symptoms, you're all test cases for. The final version of the technology. Tonight's operation isn't just about eliminating foreign intelligence threats. It's about demonstrating the capabilities of the enhanced operative program to government officials who will decide whether to expand it globally." Marcus had accessed the hidden passage and was examining the transport system beyond a sleek underground train that looked decades ahead of any public technology. "They're going to use us to prove that memory-enhanced soldiers are the future of warfare. Unless we stop them," Daniel said, feeling the full weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. The foreign tactical knowledge in his mind was providing detailed analysis of what would be required to infiltrate and shut down the Nevada facility. But the mission would require capabilities that push far beyond normal human limits. "It's a suicide mission," Sarah said, reading the tactical assessment in his expression. "You're talking about attacking a heavily defended military installation with just the 3 of you." 4, Dr. Hayes corrected. "I've been planning this for 3 years, ever since I discovered what really happened to Harold. I have complete facility schematics, security protocols, and insider knowledge of their operational procedures." Daniel looked at his wife and daughter, feeling the terrible choice before him with crystal clarity. He could surrender to the government and allow himself to be used as a weapon in their demonstration, preserving his family's safety, but condemning dozens of other enhanced operatives to death or worse. Or he could attempt to destroy the program that had created him, knowing that failure would result in elimination not just for himself, but for everyone he loved. "There's a third option," Harold's voice said through Daniel's mouth, the scientific personality providing analysis with cold logic. "We don't just destroy the facility. We broadcast the truth about Operation Desert Mirage to the world. Force them to shut down the program by making secrecy impossible." "How?" Sarah asked. Daniel felt memories surfacing of his father's most closely. Guarded research backup systems, fail-safes, and emergency protocols that Dr. Whitman had built into the Nevada facility in case the government ever turned against him. Dad never trusted his government partners completely, Harold explained through Daniel's voice. He built a dead man switch into the facility's main computer system. If activated, it would automatically transmit complete documentation of the program to every major news organization and intelligence service worldwide. "Why hasn't it been triggered before now?" Marcus asked. "Because it requires biometric confirmation from 2 specific individuals," Daniel replied, understanding flowing from recovered memories. Dr. Harold Whitman Sr. and his son Harold Jr. Me. Dr. Hayes stared at him with growing hope. "Your father's final insurance policy. He made sure that if anything happened to him, you would be able to expose what he'd created. But accessing the dead man's switch requires reaching the facility's main computer core," Daniel continued, tactical analysis overriding hope with harsh reality, "which is located on the most heavily defended level of the installation, surrounded by automated defense systems and enhanced operatives who won't hesitate to kill anyone who threatens the program." The underground transport system's arrival chime echoed through the hidden passage, a sleek, silent train that represented their only chance of reaching Nevada before tonight's coordinated operation eliminated the remaining subjects and buried the truth about Desert Mirage forever. As they prepared to board the train that would carry them toward either salvation or destruction, Daniel felt the final integration of his fractured personalities beginning. Harold Whitman's scientific knowledge, Daniel Mercer's emotional connections, and the tactical capabilities of multiple DC soldiers were merging into something unprecedented. An enhanced operative who retained authentic human feelings, while possessing capabilities that exceeded normal human limits. Whether this new identity would be enough to stop his father's creation remained to be seen. But for the first time since his condition had begun, Daniel felt that he was becoming someone who might actually be capable of challenging the forces that had created him. The train that emerged from the darkness was like nothing Sarah had ever seen, silent, streamlined, and clearly built with technology decades ahead of anything in public use. As they climbed aboard, Daniel realized that he was finally returning to the place where Harold Whitman had died and Daniel Mercer had been born. The question now was whether either identity would survive what they would find at Facility X7, or whether the truth about Operation Desert Mirage would die with them in the Nevada desert, where it had all begun 60 years ago. The underground maglev train carried them through 8 hours of absolute darkness before emerging into the Nevada facility's arrival platform. Daniel had spent the journey experiencing a continuous stream of recovered memories. Harold's childhood, visits to the underground complex, his father's pride in showing him the memory extraction laboratories, and the gradual realization that everything he believed about his life had been carefully constructed fiction. Facility X7 had grown dramatically since the 1960s. What had once been a small research installation had expanded into a vast underground complex covering several square miles beneath the Nevada desert. The arrival platform alone was larger than most airport terminals, with multiple train lines converging from directions that suggested a national network of hidden transportation routes. "Security's been modified since my last visit," Daniel said. His recovered Harold memories, providing detailed knowledge of the facility's original layout, while his enhanced tactical awareness analyzed the new defensive measures. Marcus was studying scanner readings on a device Dr. Hayes had provided. I'm detecting at least 40 enhanced operatives in the complex, plus conventional security forces and research personnel. We're outnumbered approximately 20 to 1. But we have advantages they don't expect, Dr. Hayes said, checking her own equipment. Harold's biometric access codes are still valid, and I have override protocols that your father built into the system's fundamental architecture. Sarah had remained quiet during the journey, holding Emma close while struggling to process the magnitude of what they were attempting. Now, standing in the sterile arrival platform, she looked at Daniel with an expression that combined love, fear, and growing acceptance of his transformed identity. How much of the man I married is still in there? She asked quietly. Daniel felt both personalities considering her question. Harold's analytical mind provided technical answers about memory integration and personality preservation, while Daniel's emotional core responded with feelings that transcended the artificial nature of their relationship's origins. The love is real, he said finally. Everything else might be fabricated, but what I feel for you and Emma, that's authentic. That's the part of me that was never artificial. Emma tugged on his shirt, her 8-year-old face serious with concentration. Daddy, you smell different now. She was right. The green fluid seeping from his deteriorating skin had developed a metallic, ozone-like scent that seemed to intensify as they moved deeper into the facility. Dr. Hayes had explained that the phosphorescent discharge was his brain's final attempt to reject the foreign memories before complete personality integration occurred. The extraction laboratory is on level 7, Daniel said, accessing facility schematics that Harold had helped design decades ago. But the main computer core with the dead man switch is on level 12, behind multiple security barriers and automated defense systems. How long do we have before your condition becomes critical? Dr. Hayes asked, noting the increasing rate of fluid discharge and the way Daniel's left eye was beginning to swell closed. Based on Tommy Morrison's progression timeline, perhaps 6 hours before total system failure, Daniel replied. Though the assessment came from Harold's scientific knowledge, rather than medical hope, they moved through the facility's corridors with the cautious precision of a team infiltrating hostile territory. The underground complex bustled with activity that seemed focused on final preparations for the evening's coordinated operations. Personnel hurried between laboratories and command centers, and the air hummed with the electric tension of an organization preparing for a significant military action. There, Marcus whispered, pointing to a bulletin board displaying mission briefings. The documents outlined simultaneous strikes against foreign intelligence installations in major American cities, all scheduled to commence at 2100 hours Eastern Time. Each operation would be conducted by enhanced operatives, whose constructed identities provided perfect cover for their activities. They're really going to do it, Sarah breathed, studying the operational details with growing horror. Daniel felt the foreign tactical knowledge, analyzing the mission parameters with professional appreciation for their sophistication. The enhanced operatives would eliminate high-value intelligence targets, while making the attacks appear to be the work of foreign terrorists. Clean, deniable, and strategically devastating to America's international rivals. We need to split up, he said. The integrated personalities providing tactical assessment that none of them wanted to hear. Dr. Hayes and I will attempt to reach the computer core and activate the dead man switch. Marcus, you get Sarah and Emma to the extraction laboratory and prepare the memory reversal equipment. Absolutely not, Sarah said firmly. We're not separating. Sarah, listen to me. Daniel took her hands, feeling the strange texture of the green fluid that now coated everything he touched. The route to level 12 goes through sections designed to eliminate intruders. My enhanced capabilities might be enough to get through, but only if I'm not slowed down by protecting others. Dr. Hayes was monitoring facility communications through Bradford's device. He's right. The automated defenses are programmed to respond to multiple intruders with lethal force, but they might allow passage for a single person with proper biometric clearance. And if the biometric scanners don't recognize Harold after 30 years of physical changes? Marcus asked. Daniel felt Harold's memories providing the answer with disturbing certainty. Then we used the backup protocol Dad built into the system. Blood sample analysis combined with neural pattern recognition. The scanners will read the memory, overlay patterns, and confirm my identity as Subject 47. But reaching the computer core means abandoning any chance of reversing your condition. Dr. Hayes warned. The memory extraction laboratory is in the opposite direction, and once the facility goes into lockdown, movement between levels becomes impossible. The choice before them was stark and terrible. Daniel could attempt to reverse his condition and reclaim his original identity, but only by allowing the evening's operations to proceed and condemning dozens of enhanced operatives to death. Or he could sacrifice his chance at mental freedom to expose the program and save others, knowing that doing so would likely complete his transformation into someone else entirely. There's another consideration, Marcus said, studying the facility schematics on his scanner. Even if we successfully activate the dead man switch, the automated systems will attempt to eliminate all witnesses. The facility's final security, protocol, includes releasing a neurotoxin designed to kill everyone inside the complex. Dad's ultimate insurance policy, Harold's voice said through Daniel's mouth. If the program was ever exposed, he wanted to ensure that no one survived to face prosecution or retaliation. Sarah was staring at Daniel with an expression of profound loss. You're talking about a suicide mission. I'm talking about stopping something that should never have been created in the first place. Daniel replied, feeling the weight of responsibility. That came with understanding the full scope of what his father had unleashed. Emma had been listening to their conversation with the intense concentration that children bring to adult discussions they don't fully understand. Now she stood and walked to Daniel, reaching up to touch one of the lumps on his face with fearless compassion. Does it hurt, Daddy? Not anymore, sweetheart, he said honestly. The physical symptoms had progressed beyond pain into a strange numbness that seemed to spread as the green fluid increased. But I need you to do something very important for me. What? I need you to remember that I love you, no matter what happens next. And I need you to help Mommy remember all the good times we had together, even if some of those memories turn out to be different from what we thought. Emma nodded with the solemn seriousness that children reserve for promises they intend to keep. I'll remember, Daddy. Dr. Hayes had been preparing her own equipment, medical scanners, computer interfaces, and what appeared to be weapons more sophisticated than anything Marcus had produced. I've been planning this mission for 3 years, she said, checking her gear with professional efficiency. Your father destroyed my family when he turned you into his test subject. Tonight, we end what he started. As they prepared to separate and begin their desperate infiltration of a facility's most heavily defended areas, Daniel felt the final integration of his multiple personalities completing. Harold Whitman's scientific brilliance, Daniel Mercer's emotional depth, and the tactical expertise of multiple deceased operatives were combining into something unprecedented. An enhanced individual who retained authentic human connections while possessing capabilities that could challenge the system that had created him. The memory extraction device they needed to reverse other subjects' conditions was 18 levels away, through corridors filled with armed guards and automated defenses. The computer core containing the dead man switch was 12 levels in the opposite direction, protected by security measures designed to kill anyone who attempted unauthorized access. Both objectives were probably impossible to achieve, and attempting either one would likely trigger the facility's final protocol, the release of neurotoxins that would eliminate everyone inside the complex to protect the program's secrecy. But as Daniel looked at his daughter's trusting face and felt Sarah's hand squeeze his own despite the strange fluid coating his skin, he realized that some choices transcended tactical analysis. The enhanced operatives scheduled to conduct tonight's attacks were victims just like him, carrying out missions with memories and motivations that weren't their own. Stopping them would require sacrificing his chance at personal salvation. But it might be the only way to prevent his father's creation from consuming an entire generation of enhanced soldiers who deserved the chance to discover their own true identities. As they moved deeper into Facility X7, Daniel wondered whether Harold Whitman's son could find the strength to destroy his father's life's work, and whether Daniel Mercer's love for his family could survive the revelation that everything he believed about their life together had been carefully constructed to serve the needs of a classified military program that had turned human identity itself into a weapon of war. The memory extraction device hummed to life with a sound that triggered profound recognition in Daniel's fragmented consciousness. He'd heard this exact frequency before, not as Daniel Mercer receiving treatment, but as Harold Whitman watching his father conduct the original overlay procedures that had created him. Sarah and Emma were safely positioned in the extraction laboratory's observation booth, protected by reinforced glass, while Dr. Hayes prepared the complex machinery that might reverse Daniel's condition. But the process would require him to surrender all foreign memories, including the tactical knowledge that had gotten them this far and the enhanced capabilities they might still need to escape. The extraction will take approximately 40 minutes, Dr. Hayes explained, attaching neural interface cables to Daniel's head with practiced efficiency. During that time, you'll experience the complete removal of all implanted memories and personalities. What remains will be Harold Whitman as he existed at age 8, plus whatever authentic experiences you've accumulated since then. What about my feelings for Sarah and Emma? Daniel asked, though the question came from the integrated personality that had emerged from Harold and Daniel's merger. Emotions formed after the original overlay should remain intact, Dr. Hayes replied, though her tone suggested uncertainty. But you won't remember how those relationships developed, and you may not feel the same level of attachment once the supporting memories are removed. Marcus was monitoring security feeds from the laboratory's computer terminal. We have problems. The facility's main security system has detected our presence. Automated defenses are activating, and enhanced operatives are being deployed to contain U.S. Through the observation booth's windows, they could see armed figures moving through the corridors with coordinated precision. But these weren't conventional security forces. They moved with the fluid efficiency of individuals whose tactical knowledge had been enhanced through the same memory overlay procedures that had created Daniel. Enhanced operatives? Sarah asked, recognizing the similarity to Daniel's recent behavioral changes. Fully integrated subjects, Dr. Hayes confirmed grimly. Individuals who've undergone complete personality replacement and now serve as the facility's primary security force. They have no memory of their original identities and no emotional connections that might interfere with their missions. As the extraction device powered up to full capacity, Daniel experienced a sudden flood of recovered memories from his childhood as Harold Whitman. He could now recall his father's explanations of the research, his own eager participation in early experiments, and the gradual realization that he was becoming something fundamentally different from other children. Most disturbing was a recovered memory from the day before his 8th birthday, the last day Harold Whitman had existed as himself. His father had shown him a collection of video recordings featuring a boy named Daniel Mercer, explaining that Harold would soon have all of Daniel's memories and experiences in addition to his own. "You'll be special, son," Dr. Whitman Sr. had said in the memory. "You'll have the knowledge and capabilities of someone much older, but you'll still be my Harold underneath it all." But the 8-year-old Harold in the memory had asked a question that his father hadn't answered. What happens to the real Daniel Mercer? The boy in the videos? Now, 30 years later, Daniel finally understood the answer. The real Daniel Mercer had died of leukemia at age 8, and his personality had been preserved through the same memory extraction technology that was currently preparing to reverse Daniel's condition. His father had overlaid a dead child's identity onto his own son, creating a fusion that was neither wholly Harold nor completely Daniel. "Dr. Hayes," he said urgently, understanding flooding through his integrated consciousness. "The original Daniel Mercer, his memories are stored in the facility's databanks." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that reversing my condition won't just remove the foreign military memories. It will eliminate Daniel Mercer entirely, leaving only Harold Whitman with no knowledge of the life I've lived with Sarah and Emma." The terrible truth settled over the laboratory like a physical weight. Daniel's love for his family was real, but it belonged to the integrated personality that had emerged from the overlay process. Remove the Daniel Mercer memories, and Harold Whitman would have no emotional connection to the wife and daughter who had become the center of his existence. Sarah pressed her hands against the observation booth's glass, her face reflecting the impossible choice they were facing. "So we can save Harold, but we lose Daniel? Or we keep Daniel and lose Harold?" "There might be a third option," Dr. Hayes said, studying the extraction device's control interface with growing excitement. "Your father's notes mention an experimental procedure he called selective extraction. Instead of removing all foreign memories, we could potentially remove only the military overlays while preserving the Daniel Mercer personality core." "But you've never attempted that procedure before," Marcus pointed out, his attention divided between the security monitors and their conversation. "No, but the theoretical framework is sound. We isolate the memory engrams associated with military knowledge and tactical capabilities while leaving the personal identity structure intact." The facility's alarm system activated with a piercing wail that echoed through the underground complex. Red emergency lighting bathed the laboratory in an ominous glow as automated security announcements began broadcasting warnings about unauthorized access to restricted areas. "They found us," Marcus reported, watching enhanced operatives converging on their location through multiple corridor approaches. "We have maybe 10 minutes before they reach this level." Daniel felt the integrated tactical knowledge in his mind, analyzing their defensive options with cold efficiency. The laboratory could be secured, but only temporarily. Eventually, the enhanced operatives would breach their defenses, and a mission to activate the dead man switch would fail. "Start the extraction," he told Dr. Hayes, settling onto the medical table that dominated the center of the laboratory. "Daniel, if the procedure fails, you can lose all your memories. Harold." "Daniel, everything," Sarah warned. "And if I don't try, 47 enhanced operatives will be activated tonight to conduct false flag operations that could start a war." Daniel replied, feeling the weight of responsibility that came with understanding the full scope of his father's creation. Dr. Hayes began attaching neural interface cables to Daniel's skull, working with the practiced efficiency of someone who had studied these procedures for years. The extraction device responded to his biometric patterns with recognition signals that confirmed his identity as both Harold Whitman Jr. and Subject 47. "I'm detecting multiple personality overlays," Dr. Hayes said, studying the device's readouts with growing concern. "This is more complex than anything documented in your father's research. You're carrying memory fragments from at least 8 different individuals." 8? Marcus looked up from his security monitoring. The official records only mentioned Tommy Morrison. The program continued to add capabilities, Daniel realized. Recovered memories providing explanations with disturbing clarity. Each overlay added specific skills languages, technical knowledge, combat experience. I've been enhanced repeatedly over 30 years. Through the observation booth speakers, they could hear the approaching enhanced operatives, coordinating their assault with the mechanical precision of individuals whose emotional responses had been systematically removed. These weren't soldiers. Following orders, they were biological weapons programmed to eliminate threats to their operational security. Beginning selective extraction, Dr. Hayes announced, activating the device's primary systems. Pain flooded Daniel's consciousness as the machine began mapping and isolating different categories of memories. He could feel the foreign personalities fighting the extraction process, trying to maintain their integration with his core identity. But most disturbing was the realization that removing the military overlays would also eliminate much of the tactical knowledge they needed to survive the next few minutes. "Sarah," he gasped, his voice strained by the neural interface's invasive procedures. "In my jacket pocket, there's a device that will activate the facility's emergency lockdown. If something happens to me, use it." She nodded, tears streaming down her face as she watched the extraction process begin to tear apart the integrated personality she'd learned to love. The monitors showed Daniel's neural activity fragmenting into distinct patterns, Harold's original consciousness, Daniel Mercer's overlaid identity, and the tactical knowledge from multiple deceased soldiers. "I'm isolating the military memories now," Dr. Hayes announced. "But the extraction is triggering defensive responses from the other personality overlays. They're trying to preserve themselves by integrating more deeply with your core consciousness." Daniel felt the foreign voices in his mind becoming more distinct and desperate as the extraction process threatened their existence. Tommy Morrison's memories were fighting to remain active. Captain Hayes's intelligence training was resisting removal, and the tactical knowledge from unnamed special operations personnel was trying to override the extraction entirely. But most disturbing was the realization that these personalities had developed their own sense of self-preservation during their decades of integration. They weren't just memory sets. They had become distinct consciousnesses that wanted to continue existing. The laboratory door exploded inward as enhanced operatives breached their final defensive barrier. Marcus engaged them with weapons he'd acquired from the facility's armory, but his conventional combat training was no match for operatives whose tactical knowledge had been enhanced through the same overlay procedures that had created Daniel. "Sarah, now!" Daniel shouted, his voice distorted by the neural interface, but carrying urgent authority. Sarah activated the emergency lockdown device, and the facility responded with a mechanical grinding that suggested massive barrier sealing off sections of the complex. Emergency lighting flickered to amber, and automated announcements began warning of containment protocols being implemented. "Lockdown initiated," Dr. Hayes reported. "But it's also trapping us inside with the enhanced operatives." Daniel felt the extraction process reaching a critical threshold. The foreign personalities were beginning to separate from his core consciousness. But the procedure was causing massive neural trauma that made coherent thought increasingly difficult. Through the pain and disorientation, he could feel Harold Whitman's original personality emerging for the first time in 30 years. "The video," he gasped, pointing toward a storage unit Dr. Hayes had brought from the surface. "Dad recorded a message Harold's 8th birthday. I need to see who I was before he changed me." Dr. Hayes activated a portable video player while continuing to monitor the extraction process. The screen filled with grainy footage of a young boy blowing out candles on a birthday cake, laughing with pure joy as his father applauded from behind the camera. "Happy birthday, Harold," Dr. Whitman Sr.'s voice said from the recording. 8 years old today. "Tell Daddy what you want to be when you grow up." The boy on the screen looked directly into the camera with bright, innocent eyes. "I want to help people, Daddy. I want to be a doctor like you and make sick people better." The simple, honest answer from his 8-year-old self hit Daniel with devastating emotional force. Harold Whitman had wanted to heal people, not become a weapon designed to kill them. The irony was profound. His father had destroyed his son's fundamental nature in order to create something that served the opposite of Harold's original purpose. As the memory extraction reached completion, Daniel felt the foreign personalities finally separating from his consciousness. The tactical knowledge that had sustained them through their infiltration was disappearing, along with the enhanced capabilities that had made him feel like something more than human. What remained was a fusion of Harold's original innocence and Daniel's authentic love for the family he'd found, a personality that was neither wholly the boy who had entered the facility at age 8, nor the constructed soldier who had emerged, but something new that carried the best elements of both identities. "Extraction complete," Dr. Hayes announced, powering down the device. "Neural patterns are stabilizing, but we need to evacuate immediately. The facility's lockdown won't contain the enhanced operatives indefinitely." Daniel sat up slowly, feeling fundamentally different from the person who had entered the laboratory. The green fluid had stopped flowing from his skin, and the lumps were already beginning to recede as his brain ceased its rejection of foreign memories. But more importantly, his thoughts felt clear and unified for the first time since his condition had begun. "I remember both lives now," he said, his voice carrying a calm certainty that belonged to neither Harold nor Daniel alone. Harold's childhood and Daniel's family. The memories feel equally real because they're both part of who I've become. "And the mission knowledge?" Marcus asked, noting that Daniel's tactical awareness seemed to have diminished significantly. "Gone," Daniel replied. "But I still remember why we're here and what we need to do." As enhanced operatives began cutting through the laboratory's sealed door with equipment that suggested they had unlimited resources and time, Daniel realized that the most crucial part of their mission still lay ahead. The dead man's switch remained unactivated. The coordinated attacks were still scheduled to proceed, and dozens of enhanced operatives would die tonight unless someone reached the facility's computer core and exposed the truth about Operation Desert Mirage. But now that task would have to be accomplished by Harold Whitman, a man who remembered being 8 years old and wanting to help people, guided by Daniel Mercer's love for a family that had become real through 30 years of constructed memories, supported by just enough recovered tactical knowledge to make the impossible seem merely improbable. The final confrontation with his father's legacy was about to begin. 6 months after the destruction of Facility X7, Daniel sat in his backyard in Pine Ridge, Montana, watching Emma demonstrate the bicycle riding skills she'd finally mastered during his recovery. The memory of teaching her their first completely authentic shared experience carried a sweetness that no manufactured recollection could match. The man who had emerged from the memory extraction was neither Harold Whitman nor Daniel Mercer, but someone new who carried the essential elements of both identities. He remembered Harold's childhood desire to help people, and he felt Daniel's profound love for the family that had become real through 30 years of carefully constructed experiences. Sarah emerged from the house, carrying 2 cups of coffee, moving with the careful grace of someone who had learned to love the same person twice, first as the constructed Daniel Mercer, then as the integrated personality who had chosen to preserve their relationship despite learning its artificial origins. "Dr. Hayes called," she said, settling into the chair beside him. "The congressional hearings begin next week." Daniel nodded, feeling the familiar mixture of anticipation and dread that accompanied discussions of his testimony. The dead man's switch had worked exactly as his father had designed it, broadcasting complete documentation of Operation Desert Mirage to intelligence agencies, news organizations, and human rights groups worldwide. The program's exposure had triggered the largest intelligence scandal in American history. "How many subjects have they found so far?" he asked, though he already knew the number had been climbing steadily as investigators uncovered the full scope of the memory overlay program. 83 confirmed cases spanning 6 decades, Sarah replied. Some have requested memory extraction like you received. Others are choosing to keep their enhanced capabilities and integrate their multiple personalities. And the ones who were fully converted? Sarah's expression grew somber. 17 subjects were so completely overlaid that extraction would have left them with no functional personality. They're receiving care at specialized facilities, but the doctors aren't optimistic about recovery. Daniel felt the familiar weight of survivor's guilt that had plagued him since the facility's destruction. He'd been fortunate the extraction process had removed the military overlays while preserving enough of both Harold and Daniel to create a functional integrated identity. Many others hadn't been so lucky. Emma abandoned her bicycle practice and ran toward them, her face bright with excitement. "Daddy, look what I found." She held up a smooth river stone, worn by time into an almost perfect oval. "It's just like the one you used to have from Afghanistan." "It's beautiful, sweetheart," Daniel said, accepting the stone and feeling its familiar weight. The memory of sending a similar stone to Emma during his deployment was now known to be fabricated, but the love behind the gesture remained authentic. "Would you like to hear a story about it?" "Yes." Emma climbed onto his lap, settling against his chest with the casual intimacy that had survived the revelation of their relationship's artificial origins. "Once upon a time," Daniel began, "there was a little girl who found a magic stone that could hold memories. But this stone was special because it only kept the memories that came from real love, not the ones that were made by machines." Sarah smiled at his improvised fairy tale, recognizing his ongoing effort to help Emma understand the complex truth about their family's history. Their daughter had adapted to the revelations with remarkable resilience, accepting that her daddy was someone different from who they'd thought, while maintaining absolute certainty that his love for her was real. "What happened to the fake memories?" Emma asked, following the story with 8-year-old logic. "They faded away like bad dreams," Daniel replied. "And what was left were all the true things, like how much Daddy loves you and Mommy, and how proud he is of you learning to ride your bicycle." As Emma giggled at the story's conclusion, Daniel felt the profound contentment that had replaced the restless energy that had characterized his enhanced operative phase. The tactical knowledge and enhanced capabilities were gone, but in their place was something more valuable: authentic relationships built on truth rather than manufactured experiences. Dr. Hayes had explained that his case was unique among the recovered subjects. Most individuals who underwent memory extraction either retained their original personality with gaps in their recalled experiences, or emerged as completely different people with no emotional connections to their constructed lives. Daniel alone had managed to integrate the authentic elements from both identities while rejecting the artificial military enhancements. "Daddy's different now, but he's still Daddy," had been Emma's simple assessment of the situation, displaying the wisdom that children sometimes possess about complex emotional truths. The legal proceedings following the facility's exposure had been extensive and ongoing. Colonel Bradford and his surviving operatives faced charges ranging from illegal medical experimentation to conspiracy to commit murder. The families of subjects who had died during the program's 6-decade run were pursuing civil suits against the government agencies that had authorized the research. But perhaps most importantly, the memory extraction technology itself had been placed under international oversight, with strict protocols preventing its use for military or intelligence purposes. Dr. Whitman Sr.'s creation would be studied and regulated, but never again used to turn human identity into a weapon of war. "I've been thinking about what I want to do next," Daniel said, watching Emma return to her bicycle practice with determined concentration. "Something involving helping people?" Sarah asked, recognizing the echo of Harold's childhood ambition in his tone. Medical research, maybe. Working with other subjects who were trying to recover their authentic identities. Daniel paused, accessing memories that felt both foreign and familiar. Dad's technology wasn't inherently evil. The memory extraction procedures could help people with traumatic brain injuries or severe PTSD. It's the military applications that were wrong. Sarah studied his profile, seeing traces of both the constructed husband she'd married and the recovered individual he was becoming. "You want to continue his research?" "I want to fix what he broke," Daniel replied. "Help other people find their way back to who they really are, instead of turning them into weapons." The sound of helicopters in the distance triggered a brief moment of hypervigilance, a residual response from his enhanced operative conditioning. But the aircraft passed overhead without slowing. The government had agreed to leave him and his family alone in exchange for his cooperation with the congressional investigation and his testimony about the program's operations. As afternoon faded into evening, the Mercer family sat together on their back porch, watching fireflies emerge in the gathering dusk. Emma had finally mastered the art of catching them gently, cupping them in her small hands before releasing them back into the summer air. "Tell me about Harold," Sarah said, quietly, her voice carrying the curiosity that had replaced her initial fear about Daniel's recovered identity. "He wanted to be a doctor," Daniel replied, accessing childhood memories that felt as authentic as anything from his constructed life as Daniel Mercer. He loved science and helping people. He volunteered for his father's experiments because he thought he was contributing to medical research that would save lives. And instead, he became the foundation for a program that turned people into living weapons. Daniel felt the familiar sadness that accompanied discussions of his father's betrayal. But Harold's original purpose is still in here somewhere. Maybe it's time to let him try to fulfill that childhood dream. Emma returned from her firefly expedition and settled between her parents, tired from her day of adventure, but content in the security of their shared presence. As the Montana sky darkened and filled with stars, Daniel felt the peace that came from authentic relationships built on truth rather than manufactured experiences. The lumps that had marked his deteriorating condition were now just small scars that served as reminders of how close he'd come to losing himself entirely to someone else's memories and motivations. The green fluid that had leaked from his failing identity had been replaced by the steady pulse of an integrated personality that belonged wholly to him. "I love you," Sarah said quietly, her hand finding his in the darkness. "I love you too," he replied, meaning it with both Harold's original capacity for emotion and Daniel's constructed but authentic devotion. Above them, the stars shone with the same light that had guided travelers for millennia, constant, reliable, and true. Daniel had finally found his way back to himself, carrying the best parts of both identities while leaving behind the and artificial enhancements that had nearly consumed his humanity. Operation Desert Mirage was over, its secrets exposed and its victims recovering. But the most important victory was the simplest one: a family reunited around the truth of who they really were, building new memories on the foundation of authentic love rather than manufactured experiences. As Emma fell asleep against his chest, and Sarah's breathing settled into the rhythm of contentment, Daniel realized that this moment, unenhanced by foreign memories or tactical knowledge, was more valuable than any capability his father's technology could have provided. He was finally, completely, authentically himself. And that was enough.